Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I've been married to Kathy for 15 years. We have 3 kids, Evan, Derek, and Lila, and a nice house in a good school district. Our lives are comfortable, 2 newer cars, and my wife has the luxury of working for a nonprofit because we don't really need the extra income. I have a job that interests me. The workload's eased up in the last few years, and my hours are reasonable. I travel occasionally, both for work and pleasure. On the surface, everything's great. Good family, a stable home, the 2-car garage. What else could I possibly want? But then, one evening after work, I came home to find Kathy sitting at the kitchen table looking nervous. "Hey, what's going on? Is everything okay with the kids?" I asked, immediately worried. She looked at me, her face tight with tension. "They're fine, Ryan," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I have some really bad news. I'm leaving you. I'm going to marry Henry Caldwell." I froze. "What? Who's Henry Caldwell? What does he have that I don't? Do you love him?" She nodded, her eyes sad. "I do love him. We've been seeing each other for about a year now. He's the governor's cousin, on the side of the family that inherited most of the fortune. The kids and I are going to move in with him." That name hit me like a ton of bricks. Henry Caldwell? That Caldwell? Are you serious? You've been seeing him for a year and I never knew? What the hell is going on? I was stunned. My whole world had just crumbled. It's true then. The husband is the last to know. Well, I guess I made it easy for you. Me trusting you implicitly. Are the children mine? Of course they are. How could you think that of me? Oh, yes, they are yours. She was nice looking, but not a stunner. And nothing out of the ordinary in bed. Unless she must have worked a lot harder to please him than she ever did with me. But what's the point? The pain was turning to a bitter anger, but I was able to keep control of myself. I guess I've been screwing a $1 million hooker. I glared at her, jumped to my feet, and gestured towards the door. "Well, get the hell out of my house, and don't let the door hit your butt on the way out. You goddamn cheating woman. Enjoy the good life, until he dumps you for someone younger. I have nothing more to say to you." She tossed an envelope on the table and moved quickly out the door, and I sat and cried. I went upstairs to lie down, and saw that the children's rooms had been emptied out, including the pictures they had hung on the walls. It felt like I was living in a tomb. In the weeks to follow, she and Henry Caldwell refused to let me talk with my kids. It was Lila who snuck out and knocked on my door. We worked out a clandestine meeting arrangement. I got 6 burner phones and gave the kids one of the numbers. Every couple of weeks I gave them a new number, so if anyone checked their phones, my numbers were only called occasionally. We were careful about emails which could only be sent from the library computers or a friend's computer, making sure that I use a fake name to hide from my ex. So, I kept up with their lives, not as often as I would like, while Lila called every other day, and the boys about once or twice a week. In the months that followed, it didn't get better. Words cannot describe the fury, hurt, depression that washed over me, that was drowning me. Kathy had traded up in marriage, so far up that she didn't bother to ask for any of our assets, alimony, or child support. There was no point. I guess, to her credit, she asked for nothing of any commercial value. But what she did take was priceless, my 3 children. We sometimes read stories where a woman is offered $1 million to have sex with some guy. Usually it's women we wonder about, the assumption being that most guys would do it for free. The goofy part of that question is, who would pay $1 million for sex, especially for sex with an average person? I guess that Caldwell has tens of millions of dollars, so I can see her bailing for that. Who knows, maybe it was love. I can say for sure I wouldn't have run off with a Mrs. Caldwell, but I suppose you don't know until someone offers. And the kids too, hiding contact with me. I guess it's the money too, the promise of a free Ivy League educations, along with the more immediate pleasures of the lifestyle big money can bring. Cars, clothes, skiing in Aspen, summer in France, doesn't compare with surf fishing at the Jersey Shore with Pop, but neither does it excuse my children for not insisting on having a foot in each camp. I thought I brought them up better than that, but then they are kids. The biggest thing was still, what the hell did Caldwell see in her? She really didn't stand out in any crowd I could imagine. She was middling in about everything. She was really good with people, but so are a lot of people. As to our friends, most stayed cordial, but now being single, occasionally I was asked to a party, and I did have a couple of buddies to fish with, but I was really lonely without my best friend, and I felt like damaged goods, which I was. I thought of suing them, but my lawyer told me to forget it, that I really didn't have a chance. And for what? I make good money, $130,000 a year, which is a nice living, but against Caldwell? So, I caved and tried to get on with my life. Like I said, in that wrenched first year I really had a hard time. My home was now just a house. Functionally, I was on the very edge of my children's lives. I wasn't fit to date women either. Really, it was my daughter that got me through that horrible year. I kept it together by immersing myself in work. I mean, what else could I do? I felt sorry for myself, buried in self-pity, rolled in misery like a dog in shit for almost a year. After 6 months of that, I sold the damn house and got an apartment in town, cut way back on overtime, and began to flesh out ideas I had come up with over the years, but were ignored by the elderly guys in management. I realized I was a better businessman than the fools running the company. Ever see clearly the way for the business to grow and prosper, but the management couldn't let go of the old business model they developed years ago, which successfully built the business, but was wrong for today's world and was taking it down? It was like I was sailing on the Titanic with me, the only one who could see the iceberg. What could you do besides dress warmly and stand near the lifeboats, reading the launch instructions? My job search was producing nothing, until out of the blue, I got a job interview from a company that bought one of our smaller competitors. They wanted me to implement my employer's old business model so they could grow their company. In a series of interviews, I pointed out the problems with that and outlined my own ideas. They were actually willing to pay a premium to lure me away from Titanic Incorporated and more besides because their business was in Chestertown, Maryland. I was able to negotiate a big vacation package by agreeing to take most of it 1 day a week and a contract tied to business growth and profits. Apparently, they had had trouble getting people to relocate to a backwater. Charming or not, Chestertown is as chaotic in the summer as it is dead in the winter. I jumped at the chance to make a clean break of it, changed my email address, got a new phone number. Of course my children knew, but not their mother. Of course, in this age of the internet, if you live your life, you cannot really disappear, but I thought of it as a way to reinvent myself, as neither my former employer nor my former wife valued me, and it helped to put them in the fuzzy light of the past. Now, I didn't get big-time rich like Caldwell, but I did real well by my standards, and as the business took off, I was able to hire talented young people to implement the business plan. After a few years, I found myself with a nice equity position and began working from home a lot and let others do the day-to-day stuff. I rented a place for a while until I found a big 3-bedroom craftsman-style bungalow on a lot with a view, but within walking distance of Chesterton. The big demand here is for old historic homes, but houses from the 1920, 1930 are modern houses and pretty reasonably priced. As a bonus, it had $20,000 of woodworking tools and a heated garage that the old guy bought new when he retired, but never got around to learning how to use. I joined the local historical society, volunteered for this and that, put myself out there, as they say, but unfortunately, the selection of suitable mates was thin. I was 45 years old, relatively few single women in the 35 to 40 age group, and of the few of a suitable age. Well, I'll get shot for saying this, but the education level of the year-round residents was mixed, and the summer people were generally too high-end for my taste. One of the members of the Historical Society asked me if I could fix an electrical problem on his boat. I liked the old guy, so he and I spent Saturday on the boat, and I fixed a plethora of assorted problems. We took it out for a short cruise, and I found I liked sailing, and he liked company, so he taught me sailing. We worked out a trade. I'd keep all the mechanical/electrical stuff running. He's pay someone to the endless cosmetic restoration and cleaning, and I could take it out more or less at will. I just had to call in advance. If it was a day sail, often as not we would go out together. I should tell you that I could have bought the damn boat, but I'm cheap, and who wants the expense of owning and maintaining a boat? I was at the marina changing the oil in the auxiliary engine, and heard hoots and shrieks as a boat was ineptly wallowing up to the dock. I grabbed a boat hook and trotted over. Seeing the run of the tide, I called for the stern rope. They threw it short, but I could just hook it and pulled the stern to the dock, whereupon in the tide pushed the bow in so I could catch that rope which was dragging in the water and tie them fast. The idiot at the wheel was drunkenly insisting I join their party for dinner at one of the expense account restaurants nearby. I had no interest in spending the evening with a bunch of honking drunks and politely demurred when a really good-looking woman came up beside Captain Rum. "Don't be put off by Wallace. I would like you to come to dinner with us. After all, you rescued us. So much you can infer from a sentience." She was sober, no rings on her left hand, nice-looking, educated, faint British accent, with a body built for comfort. "Now would you be sitting alongside me at dinner?" Hoots of teasing laughter from the boat. "He hooked the boat, and you hooked him. Way to go, Heather." We were smitten with each other. Heather was 7 years younger than me, worked in a law office in Washington, D.C., writing laws and regulations for lobbyists. She was a gorgeous thing, not Hollywood gorgeous, but somebody I certainly would pick out of a crowd. As we talked, I found she shared my politics, love of old things, the water, and reading. She couldn't have children, which bothered her years ago when she got the news, but over the years became reconciled with it. Me, after the experience I had with mine, that didn't bother me at all. Heather, I don't want this night to end. No strings here. Would you stay at my house? I've a guest bedroom with a locking door. Not that you need to. Got your driver's license with you? Give it to me? I handed it over. She took a picture of it with her phone, emailed it. There, if I don't come back in one piece, my mother will come after you. Can you drive me to Waldorf Sunday night? Sure. Where's Waldorf? No cabs around the restaurant, but I waved to a couple of older women I knew fairly well who were just leaving, and I asked them if they could drop us off at the marina where my car was. One of them had set me up with 2 blind dates and was delighted to see I was sweet on Heather. After the introductions to Grace and Eulalia, who prefers to be called Lily, they teased Heather. Lily started in. Ryan is a real asset to the town. I try to fix him up with a local girl or two, but my mistake was not being able to find anybody who looks as lovely as you. We want to keep him here, so when you marry him, you have to agree to live here. Grace chimed in. He can cook, fix anything, and has a good income. Plus, he's nice to sweet old ladies. Heather gave it right back. Well, if he's been rejected by all of the young women around here, maybe I should be careful. They must know something I don't. Lily. Or more likely you recognize what you've got there. Bathes regularly, but a very disheveled dresser. He does need taking care of. Ladies, please, I just met Heather this afternoon. You'll scare her away. We didn't have sex that weekend, but the next weekend, we took the boat out, and we drilled like rabbits as both of us were ending a long dry spell. Physically, she was the opposite of my ex-wife. The ex was short, skinny, and blonde. Heather was almost as tall as me, nicely rounded body and jet black-haired. She was English, her father from Avery, England, and her mother from Madras, India. Best of all, we laughed at each other's jokes. Unfortunately, she was also the polar opposite of my ex-wife in not so good ways. Kathy was willing to try anything you ever read about or saw in a corn film, and willing to do it a lot. Heather liked sex, but she was pretty uptight. I was puzzled because she talked a good game, but was really limited in bed, and it wasn't getting any better. I had no trouble getting her to pleasure, but she thought BJ dirty talk, outdoor sex, and just about everything else was perverted or disrespectful to her personally. I was about to reluctantly toss her back into the dating pool when I got an inspiration one cold, wet day in the fall. We walking into Chesterton one Saturday, and I realized that she was the only woman in the town still wearing sandals. I wondered if she had a foot fetish. I got 2 drinks in her that evening at the restaurant and a glass of wine at the house, so she was pretty laid back. Heather, some people feel that sex can be gross or humiliating, and that loving people should be dignified when in bed together. I think my job is to do for you whatever you enjoy, and that your job is to do for me whatever I enjoy. Ryan, don't you like making love with me? What are you talking about? What we do, you and I, is love-making. You're good at that. But there's also lusty drilling and sex play, and we haven't done anything like that. Tonight, I'd like to do that. Well, we did just that. This year the weather was remarkable mild. Well into October, and our romance was perhaps the happiest time for me in decades. Once a week, weather permitting, we'd sail on Chesapeake Bay. Often it was warm enough to shed our clothes for a while, with nary another boat in sight, and have a beer, swim, and generally screw hard once or twice, and snuggling under a blanket as the boat rocked us to sleep, and then to make love in the cool dawn. That fall we fell in love. Our town is 150 years away from D.C. in lifestyle, but only an hour and a half by car. That winter, she sold her Waldorf condo and rented a pied-a-terre in D.C., moving in with me in Chesterton. She has a somewhat flexible schedule, and most weeks spent a couple of nights in D.C. and the rest with me. I proofread her stuff not so much for spelling and grammar, but for clarity and completeness. I would be bullshitting to say that I truly understood everything she wrote, but in the moment I could follow it, and if I couldn't, there was a problem with it. She was a bit more social than me, but I like people too, and we both enjoyed going out with her friends in town. Mine near home, and life was good. She had to head into D.C. one Sunday morning to prep for a case, and as luck would have it, the town council meeting I was attending wrapped up earlier than expected on Monday. So, I decided to surprise her by driving to her apartment. I got there around 9:30, but there was no sign of her. I called, but it went straight to voicemail. Given the mess I'd just come out of with Andrea, my ex, I'll admit it made me uneasy. She called back about an hour later. Sorry, just taking a quick break, she said. I'll be working half the night. What's up? We chatted for a bit, and I was trying to figure out how to ask her where she was. Before I could, she volunteered the info. Well, it's turning into a hell of a week, she said with a sigh. We found out Sunday that our Chicago office didn't do a damn thing on the federal truck standards. So this morning, The whole team packed up and came to the Westin in Fairfax to get it all wrapped up by 2 p.m. tomorrow. I'll be lucky if I sleep at all tonight. The only good news is I'll be back in Chesterton a day earlier than planned. Her voice had that familiar mix of exhaustion and determination, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. She was so damn driven, always on the move. Oh good. Actually, the council meeting ended early, so I thought I'd surprise you. I'm at the apartment. Oh, you poor thing. Spend the night. I should be back about noon or 1. We can have lunch. I'd normally take you up on that, but I need to get back in the morning, and you'll be exhausted. Honey, I'm so sorry I missed you. At least I'll catch your scent when I slide between the sheets. I'll be missing you. I'll take a long nap at the apartment tomorrow and be home in time for a late supper. I love you. A week later, she said. I realized I have to shut my phone off a lot when I'm in meetings, or just so I can concentrate, but then I don't know who is calling, so I got a smartphone for just you and me. We can set it up so you can track me, that way you'll know where I am. I don't need to know that. I trust you. She laughed, and I trust you as well, but I have no secrets from you, and you never know. That phone feature may come in handy sometime for some other reason. So she gave me the gift of knowledge, which wasn't so good for Adam and Eve, but for me, I checked where she was a few times and never bothered again. We had had the biblical 7 years of good luck, and I wondered if it was coming to an end when I opened my door one Saturday morning to be greeted by my ex-wife. I wrinkled my nose and said, "You're dead to me," as I shut the door. Of course Heather heard what happened. Who was that? My ex-wife. I told her to F off, but now she's was knocking again. On how nice, invite her in. I told her she was dead and shut the door on her. Heather glared at me. It's my house too, and you'll be nice to her if only because she's a guest in our house. Things are obviously going very poorly for her, or she wouldn't be here. Heather smiled as she opened the door. My husband tells me you're Kathy. How nice to finally meet you. I'm Heather, by the way. I looked at her more carefully and shivered a little. Kathy was always thin, but now she looked gaunt with sunken eyes and cheeks. My first thought was, what the hell did I ever see in her? And the second had me wondering if she was seriously ill. Kathy looked at me warily and said, I'm sorry to intrude. I won't be long. Heather slid right in with, don't worry about that. We're staying at home this afternoon. We were thinking of going out, but Ryan has some yard work to get done. I'm putting water on. I do so want to talk with you. Did you have a pleasant drive down? I took the hint and went outside. Call me when the coffees dripped and left them to themselves. It must have been 20 minutes later Heather called. Coffee's ready. I had put the last quart of oil in the mower and went in the house to clean my hands and pour a coffee. I sat with them as they finished their chatter. Peace came over me. I realized thankfully that I had no feelings for Kathy at all. No love, no hate, zero emotions of any consequence, and looking at the two of them, I could honestly say I was well rid of her. The coffee mugs were finally empty. So after all these years, Kathy, I don't suppose this is a social call. No, it isn't. You have 2 daughters. The youngest is 7 years old and needs a kidney transplant. Jesus, what a bombshell. No. Of course I knew she and Caldwell had daughter, but mine? Can't be. You don't say. That's too bad, but as you know I've never met this child. So why don't you go to Switzerland or wherever money can buy everything and fix her? That's got nothing to do with me. So for the second time, why are you here? My husband's shooting blanks and, handing me an envelope, I knew you would be doubtful. So I got the DNA reports. I didn't have a sample of your DNA, but all of your children have the same father. She's your flesh and blood. We're having trouble finding a kidney match, and she in total kidney failure. Ryan, she won't live all that long, and the doctors think you're likely a match. I'm not, or I wouldn't be here. I'm here to ask you to be checked for a match, and if so to save her life by donating a kidney. I'll pay you anything you ask. Heather saw me starting to go orbital and put her hand on my arm, squeezed hard, and jumped in. We need to discuss this. Why don't you email us the detailed information and we'll discuss it and get back to you. Every day she's suffering. Kathy, let me talk to Ryan. I'll call you the day after tomorrow. I promise. Heather stood up and rummaged in the desk for one of my business cards. As Kathy was leaving, I couldn't help saying sarcastically, it was nice to hear how the number of my ex-children is multiplying. Do let me know if any more pop out. Drive carefully on your way back to where you came from. I shut the door while Heather walked Kathy to the car talking earnestly. I reheated a cup of coffee thinking the nerve of the witch to rub her money in my face and went out to my shop. Heather called me couple hours later for supper. Well, there's what I'd call a troubled woman. Her child is dying, facing a slow death, and the only best hope is a big-time favor from a guy who hates her. And that weren't enough. Her marriage is shaky. That about sum it up? I don't hate her, I just despise her, and I don't despise her for dumping me, but rather for depriving me of my children, and depriving my children of me. She thinks she has it rough facing the loss of a kid. Okay, my kids aren't dead, but they might as well be because they aren't really a part of my life. You think the kid's really mine? I doubt she'd lie about that. I imagine you'll find out pretty quickly if they check you for a kidney match. Shit, I gotta read up on that. I really don't know nothing about kidney disease, transplants, or anything like that. You make her any promises? Just what you heard me say about calling her Tuesday. The child is stable, but not good. And Ryan, I'll support you, whatever comes. I got looking up on Wikipedia, the National Kidney Foundation website, and whatever and found that the kid eventually dies without a new kidney. There is a huge shortage of kidneys. The best outcome is if the donor is a close match to the recipient. The kid would probably get a transplant at some point, but it would be a miserable time for her until she got one, and she might still die of kidney failure. Sunday night, I poured Heather a glass of the good wine we save for company, not the usual plunk we have on the table. You realize I would love to kick that woman to the curb and throw her under a bus. She hasn't changed a bit. Had she not absolutely needed me, she never would have told me about my daughter. But I have to do this. You know that, don't you? This what? Throw her under the bus or donate a kidney. We both laughed. It broke the tension. Love, I wish the kid was okay. I wish your children were part of our lives, and I wish you got to keep both kidneys. But if I had a child, I know I'd do anything I needed to do to save her, and I know you feel the same way. So I understand why you need to give her your kidney. I saw that strength, that courage and loyalty in you before I married you. I was thinking, so, she handed us a way out, didn't she? A free pass, I said, my voice low with frustration. But what do I want out of all this? Right now, it feels like all the pain and fallout is landing on me, and my daughter too. How do I get the ex and her husband to take some of the heat, to put something into this mess? I don't know why you'd care about that, she replied, shaking her head. Forget about them for now. Focus on what you want. Do you even know what that is? I paused, thinking about it for a moment. No, I guess I never really thought about it. Do you know what you want? She gave a soft chuckle, patted my arm, and smiled. That's a question only you can answer. I leaned back, looking out the window, lost in thought. I was thinking, when the boys were growing up, I was so caught up in working, bringing home the money, fixing up the house, the cars, that I never really got to enjoy them. And then they were gone. So now, I've got this daughter I don't even know. I want to be a part of her life. I want to be there for her, to have my picture taken with her on prom night. They still do proms, right? Heather nodded in agreement, though she seemed unsure where I was going with it. I want to raise her like I should have raised my older kids. That's what I want. There was a long silence before she spoke again, her tone serious. Jesus, Ryan, you're thinking about custody, aren't you? She'll never give you that. And honestly, it'd be traumatic for Maria too. I mean, I'd love to have my own daughter on weekends, but it's a lot to ask of anyone. I sighed deeply, knowing the road ahead would be far from easy. But for the first time in a while, I felt clear about what I wanted. I think she might give us custody. Remember the judgment of Solomon? 2 women claim a child. Solomon decided to cut the kid in half, one half for each claimant. One woman agreed, the other renounced her claim, rather than the child die. Solomon declared her the mother. Kathy will do the same, but I want her to have to work for it. Ryan, you don't believe that. You can't make custody a condition of donating a kidney. A kidney for the kid for a kidney. What are you thinking? Lot of thoughts running around in my mind right now. You're right, I can't require custody as a quid pro quo. The kid gets my kidney, but I was thinking Kathy doesn't have to know that. I had worked hard to push the rage out of my heart years ago, and did a good job of it too, but seeing Kathy and the secret child, it came flooding back. I wanted revenge on Kathy too, but I didn't tell Heather that. That night we worked out the framework of a deal, and one of the lawyers Heather worked with offered to work it up into something nice, legal, and enforceable. Just before we went up to Greenville, I added a page at the end. Took me almost 20 minutes to find the same font the goddamn lawyers used. I wanted everything to match. Monday, she called Miriam and set up a family meeting between us, Miriam, her husband Henry, and my 3 older children. We stipulated that Maria not be present, which was only common sense. I went up the day before for a tissue match, which proved she was my daughter, and that I was an excellent match for a kidney donation. While I was doing all that, Heather spent the better part of the day visiting with Kathy and the children, and they got along quite well. The next day, Heather and I sat down with the Caldwells. Henry was clearly annoyed at the whole thing. Kathy was sick with worry, and my other kids weren't much better. They did look good, wearing quality clothing, expensive haircuts, perfect teeth. Well, I read up on all this, and the Kidney Foundation is a really good charity. I'd like to see them come out ahead on this. So it turns out that you were correct, Kathy. Maria is my daughter, and the good news is that I'm a good match to donate a kidney for her. But what you are asking me to do is to undergo major surgery, pop out one of my kidneys, and give it to a stranger. But she's your child, said my ex-wife. No, she's the child of Henry and Kathy Caldwell. I waved towards them. You all left my life abruptly and for good. And none of you ever told me about Maria until you absolutely had to. I have every reason to expect you'll cloister Maria away from me as well, just as soon as you get your pound of flesh out of me. Plus, this is all on me. Not one of you will have shed a drop of blood, not a minute of pain. I mean, you folks don't have any skin in the game, do you? Sorry, but the continuation of my genes isn't that big a deal in my life. Kathy's face was contorted in anguish. There has to be a way. We'll do anything to save her. Anything you want. I paused a bit for dramatic effect. What will it take, you ask? Well, two things. For one, I want some time with my daughter. 72 days a year. 20% her time she'll live with Heather and I. Kathy, would you think that's fair? What's that? 2 weekends a month? Well, that'd be 48 days, so add a week or two in the summer, that's about 15% of the time. So, okay, I would get her 15% of the time and you 85% of the time. Okay, so you agree that would be fair. She looked at her husband, who shrugged and said, more than fair. I think so too. We agree on that. Now consider what I will be going through. Perfectly healthy, getting cut open and an organ removed to help someone else live. How many of you, in my place, would be willing to do what you are asking me to do? Raise your hand. The three women's hands shot up, my two sons a few seconds later, and hesitantly Henry's hand. So you'd all be willing to do what you want me to do? They looked at each other, nodding. Then we have the makings of a deal that will help the Kidney Foundation too. On one day, Kathy and I will donate kidneys, one to Maria and one to the transplant program. And when I come out of surgery, Henry goes in to donate a kidney to the foundation as well. When that happens, Maria gets my kidney. I get custody of Maria. What do we say? 15% of the time. That seems fair to us all. How's that sound? You two will be written up in the paper as heroes. Henry saw a distinction. You'll take credit for it all. What's credit to me? You can say it was your idea. You're all the more noble because your donation is going to strangers, not to kin. Everybody nodded. They were good with it, but Henry didn't look all that happy. I gave him a verbal poke. You okay with this, Jim? He quickly put on his public happy face mask. Sure, it's a good thing to do, and it helps lots of people. So why not? Kathy? They all smiled and nodded. Kathy gushed. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Ryan. You don't know what this means to me. You're wrong about that, Kathy. I do know what this means to you. In fact, more than you realize. But we all agree that Kathy, Henry, and I will donate a kidney. Nodding all around. Okay, so here's the contract for you all to sign. There is a penalty clause on the next to last page, which is my second condition, and Kathy and Henry have to initial it and date it. Henry got serious in a hurry. What the hell's this about a contract? We're all family here, that's not called for, and I for one won't sign. My replacement was grating on my nerves, the pompous prick. We're all a family here, Jimmy, only like the interlocking Olympic rings. Different families, my wife and are a family, and you, Kathy, and the children are a family, and the children, Kathy and myself, are a biological family. So the family bit is sort of muddled. The nice thing about contracts is everybody knows what they are agreeing to in advance. And the penalty clause. If for any reason either of you cannot or will not donate a kidney, Heather and I get custody of Maria. She takes my last name. And the custody figures, which we all agreed were fair, are reversed. We get her 85% of the time. You get her 15% of the time. Of course, we'll ease into this. But if one of your reneges, she'll be registered in the spring for school in Chestertown. Pandemonium. I had to raise my voice. People. If you all go through with the deal, you get what you all agreed was exactly what you all felt was fair. Only if one of you Welches, do I get custody of just one. Just one, mind you. Just one of my 4 children. Let's not be greedy here. Kathy spoke up. We'll take it. Maria lives. That is the big thing here. It's what we all want. It's win-win. She grabbed a pen and signed. Henry balked. So, Jeff, what happens if you don't go through with it? Kathy and I donate kidneys. You do nothing and Maria dies. I smiled. Good thinking, Jimmy. Of course, I come out of surgery before you go in, but there might be a problem of some sort. Here's a letter from the Kidney Foundation that in return for 2 kidneys donated to the foundation, They will put Maria at the head of the list. But you have my word I will go through with it. What more assurance can I give but my word? Kathy was melting down. Sign it, Henry. For our daughter's sake. Henry was hesitant. I'm not sure she's... Kathy jumped on him. Shut up. There's no good way to finish that thought. Sign the goddamn thing. A week later, Kathy went under the knife. And as soon as the surgeon took a piss and changed his scrubs, they cut into me. After I came out of the anesthetic in the ICU, they moved me to a private hospital room. Heather had been with me in the ICU, but as soon as I was settled in the private room, she and Lila came in talking with each other. I got an update on Kathy, and Heather telling me the doctor said I was fine. Lila looked me in the eye and told me she regretted how Henry and Kathy had tried to demonize me. Dad. It was like some kind of almost cult thinking. Like a sacrifice we needed to make for the future. I mean, it's stupid on the face of it now, but we were kids and Henry and Mom, they were all on a different planet. She started crying. I'd hold you in my arms and hug you, but I'm not up to it at the moment. Heather was right there. I can hug you, Lila. I forgive you and your dad as well. Come on. You were a kid then, and you did what you could. But in the future, Ryan and I want you to be an integral part of our life. My son Evan came in the door at that point. Good, you're awake. I'm going to donate a kidney too. I signed up for it while you were under. Henry bailed. By the way, he's postponed it into the indefinite future, but it'll never happen. Gee, Evan, I don't know, is that such a good idea? You've got your whole life ahead of you. I don't know. You don't have to, you know. The deal is done. Your kidney doesn't let him off of the hook. That had nothing to do with it. Maria gets to live with you guys. That's all to the good. I think Maria will be better off. I just gave my word. I said I'd do it. I mean, if my mother and my father could do it, and it is a good thing to do, you know? I've been watching Maria suffer, and as I understand it, they may be able to split my kidney and help 2 people. You had Jimmy figured out, didn't you, Dad? You knew he wouldn't go through with it, and he absolutely hates to be called Jimmy. We'd get grounded for 2 weeks calling him that. Heather was looking at me as it dawned on her how I engineered this thing. I figured he wouldn't give anybody a pound of flesh, but I didn't want to admit it. But better yet, he would be the goat for Kathy losing her daughter. I really don't know Jimbo at all, never laid eyes on him until a week ago. He does seem like a bit of a stuffed shirt. He's not one of us, is he, Dad? You tell me. He may be nothing to me, but I rather think he loves you too. That week began the rest of my life. At first, when we had Maria for the weekends, one of her brothers or her sister would bring her down, and often enough the 2 of them would stay the day, returning in late evening, and the wife or I would take her home Sunday. Pretty soon we had them, Maria and whoever drove her down for the whole weekend. When that all went well, we went a Thursday night to Sunday night. Often enough I had my friend's boat, so we sailed and fished and swam all summer. We took Maria and her sister on vacation seeing the sights of Washington, D.C., and then took the boys on the same tour. We extended the trips an extra day because we couldn't get the kids out of the Smithsonian. At the end of summer, Kathy came down with Maria. The 2 of us chatted. She was more relaxed and happier than I could ever remember. Heather gave us some time together. Ryan, you know Henry and I aren't getting along well, don't you? No, actually I didn't. Heather and I are going great though. Maybe you ought to chat with her. You guys must have done something right in years past. The kids turned out well. Henry hasn't really done much in the parenting department, you know? He was more of an older playmate than a father. Yeah, well, I guess it put a lot on you and the help. From the little I've seen of him, he's not one for sacrifice and hard work. Well, with enough money, you can sit around and fritter your time away, I guess. Did you intend to drive a wedge between us? Kathy, when you bailed on me, you didn't give 2 shits about me. And now I really didn't give a thought to you. First of all, like you, I wanted Maria to live a normal life, and secondly, I wanted my children back in my life. I am willing to share, but I resented greatly that you yourself would not. More than the divorce, I resented that. Well, that's all water under the bridge. I'm good with it now. So, what's your problem with him? By him reneging, I lost Maria, my baby, and now he's cheating on me too. I damn near choked, which morphed into a chuckle and the look on her face. I started hearty laughter. You worthless woman. You were happy enough when you were cheating on your husband and denying him his children, weren't you? You really expect sympathy from me? Turnabout is fair play. Well, believe me, I really do know how you feel, and agree no one should have to give up a child. Better line up a good divorce lawyer. You'll still be rich, or is there a prenup? She started to laugh too. Ryan, you can get me laughing. Yes, turnabout is justice, but justice doesn't feel good for my end. There is a prenup, but yes, I'll be rich. But not happy. That last bit is on you. Somewhere along the line, you missed an essential fact of life. You have to find out what makes you happy, and then find someone who will enable you to do whatever it is that makes you happy. Only you can figure it out and make it happen. So what if Henry is not the man? Cut your losses and develop an exit strategy. Do what you did last time. Start looking, and when you find someone to be with you, someone to help you through the divorce, at least, dump your second husband and marry your third. You're well preserved. Skinny is still in fashion. You've got money. You play golf, tennis, and probably still great in bed. What are you lacking? Seriously, give Heather a call. Whatever she did when her husband left her worked for her. She can at least commensurate with you more than I can. I started laughing again. I couldn't help myself. Kathy left in late afternoon. Later, Heather, Maria, and I walked into town for supper and back home. That night in bed, I told Heather about our conversation. So, you told her Henry was just doing to her what she did to you? That wasn't nice, and she stifled a laugh. You think she was making a run at you? That's an old-time phrase, isn't it? Make a run at you. Don't be silly. She sees how happy I am. How much you and I love each other. Besides, I told her to talk with you. That whatever you did after your divorce worked out fine for you. She can rot in hell for all I care. I went on to tell her how much I love you. Heather and I had as grand a time that night as one could have and not wake Maria. Kathy eventually moved to Florida and invited all of us down for Thanksgiving one year. She had the dinner catered, and honestly, it was awful. Nothing like the home-cooked meals we used to have. After that, the kids started alternating between spending Christmas with her and New Year's with us. We also made it a point to all get together for a big 4th of July picnic in Chestertown. The kids kept in touch with Henry, and to be fair, he took care of them financially. As for me, I only saw Henry twice after that. Once at Lila's wedding, and again at Evan's. When Derek married Ella, we held the ceremony in Chestertown, but Henry didn't even respond to the invitation. To his credit, though, he did send them a check a couple of weeks later. Kathy, on the other hand, well, she spent a fortune on plastic surgery over the years, trying to hold onto her looks. But no amount of surgery can change what's inside, and over time, she grew bitter and envious. Eventually, the kids decided it would be easier if she visited each of them for the holidays, rather than all of them visiting her. That way, each one took their turn with her, but none of them had to deal with her too often. They tell me she's had a string of lovers over the years, but none of them stuck around for long. It hasn't been a happy life for her. As for me and mine, we're good. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I've always been fascinated by stone masonry. As a kid, I'd spend hours watching my grandfather meticulously lay stones, creating timeless structures. His weathered hands moved with a grace that made the hard work seem easy. By my teens, I knew I wanted to follow in his footsteps, not just to honor him, but because I loved the craft. There's something deeply satisfying about shaping raw materials into something lasting. In my early 20s, after 4 years in the military, I returned home with a new outlook. The discipline and patience I gained paired well with masonry. I took over the family business and soon led projects my grandfather would have been proud of. But it wasn't just about building stone walls. It was the connections I made along the way. At Jerry's wedding, I smiled, happy for him. After all he'd been through, seeing his joy was heartwarming. When I got his invite, I called him immediately. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. He chuckled. "Absolutely. If it weren't for you, I'd never have met Anna. You stood by me when others would have walked away." At the wedding, his new wife hugged me and whispered, "I've heard your story. I'd love to hear it from you." I smiled as I watched them. They were older, but acted like teenagers. I wished them well. While dancing with the bride, I saw her, my ex. I froze. Anna noticed and grabbed my arm. "Please don't ruin my wedding," she pleaded. "What's she doing here? Does Jerry know?" I asked, frustrated. "He knows," she replied. "He invited her for you. Now let's finish this dance." I was furious but stayed. Jerry approached me afterward, grinning. "I didn't invite her to the wedding, just the reception. You need to talk to her." I argued, but both Jerry and Anna stayed by my side. Finally, Anna snapped. "You're being ridiculous. Talk to her, get it over with, and stop ruining our night." She was right. I had too much to drink, and suddenly there she was, tears in her eyes, hand outstretched. "Will you dance with me, please?" she asked. I could have ignored her, but instead I took her hand. As we danced, I felt her tears on my jacket. She whispered, Let me pretend for just a moment that you still love me." The truth was I did. We moved slowly, lost in memories. I thought about all the women I'd loved, but she was the one who lingered, the one who wasn't really mine. That's why it hurt so much. As I hugged her tighter, I realized I was only torturing myself. I saw the fight coming but didn't believe it. A smaller guy, about 40, rushed at me, his friends trying to stop him. I was 31, tall, strong, and feeling good. It was a Thursday, I'd just been paid, and I was waiting for my girlfriend. What could go wrong? I didn't know the guy and had never seen him before. He stood right in front of me, and I wondered what he was up to as his hands slowly moved up from his knees, forming a fist. It was so awkward I figured he'd never thrown a punch before. Then he punched me in the eye. I was so focused on his weird movements, I didn't even think to defend myself. I fell and he tried to kick me. I had been out of the military long enough for this guy to catch me off guard. But my instincts kicked in fast. I rolled, grabbed his leg, and pulled him down, trapping him easily. His two friends tried to jump in, but they were outnumbered, and the bartender helped pull me off him. My cousin, who owned the bar, saw everything but just kept polishing glasses. I caught my breath and got in the guy's face. "What's your problem, man? You must have a last wish, attacking someone half your age and twice your size." He kept struggling. "Let me go, you lowlife. You need to learn not to mess with married women." I stared at him, thinking he was either high or crazy. I shoved him off and stood up. "I'm not doing anything wrong, but if you come at me again, you'll regret it. Got it?" He didn't. He came at me again, and I knocked him out with one punch. I told his friends to get him out, and the bartender backed me up. They dragged him away, and we all laughed it off until my date arrived. She saw my bruise and asked, "What happened?" Some guy thought I was messing with his wife and sucker punched me. Sad, really. He was older, short, and didn't know how to fight, but he had guts. As I explained, her face went pale. I tried to lighten the mood. "Relax, I'm fine, but if you want to kiss it better, I won't complain." She kissed me and teased, "He must have been crazy to attack you. Didn't he notice these muscles?" Later, I found out she just wanted me to describe him again. He was older, short, a bit out of shape, but had nerve. If his wife really was cheating, it could get ugly. Melody excused herself, saying she wasn't feeling well. My cousin, the bartender, chimed in. "Guys like that are the ones you have to watch. They snap when they find out their wife's cheating. I've seen it 100 times. Let's hope you rattled him enough to stay away." I agreed. "I hope he finds the right guy and deals with him, but he needs to get his facts straight first." Melody came back looking upset. "Sorry, the hospital called. Big accident on the highway and they need help. I'll call you tomorrow if I'm not too tired." She kissed me and left. She was a trauma nurse, so this happened often. Luckily, she had a few days off after her long shifts while I worked out of town most of the week. No, I don't have a fancy job flying around the country solving big problems. I lay stone. That's right, big rocks. My dad was always traveling for work, making big money for his company. So my mom mostly raised my sister and me on her own. She did a great job, but when I was 12, my dad left her for a younger woman. It broke her heart, but my grandfather, who never liked him, stepped in. Dad tried to rush the divorce and cut off her medical benefits, but Granddad hired a top divorce lawyer and made sure she got what she deserved. Dad backed down when his career was threatened and moved to the West Coast. We hardly saw him after that, except at my high school graduation when he offered to pay for college if I moved out west. I refused and kicked him out when he insisted. That was the last time I saw him. My mom later remarried a good man, and I became a big brother at 15. My stepdad offered to help pay for college, but I joined the military instead, serving 4 years, including a year each in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Afterward, I used my military benefits to go to school while working for my grandfather. Granddad was a master stonemason. I started learning from him at 14, working summers and after school. In Afghanistan, I built walls around our positions, and when one of my walls saved lives, the other guys started helping. The local Afghan masons were incredibly skilled, and I learned a lot from them, too. When I got out of the service, I joined the family business. Soon I was managing jobs with just a couple of assistants, while Granddad handled the big projects. He was planning to retire, but before he could, a texting driver run over him while he was crossing the street. He died instantly. He had already transferred the company to me by that time, and I took over at age 27. We specialized in building dry stone walls. No mortar, just skill in laying stones to keep them stable. It's a difficult craft, but we were the best. Before Granddad passed, He secured a contract to repair walls at 5 of the state's oldest universities. Some of these walls were over 300 years old. I had a crew of master masons and journeymen at each site, paying the journeymen based on their skill level, with the chance to increase their wages over time. There was some concern about whether I could handle the contract after Granddad's pass away, but I reassured them. The same skilled masons are still working, I said, and the quality won't suffer. They kept the contract with us, knowing how rare good masons are. I didn't enjoy managing the business without doing the hands-on work, so I hired my sister Becky, who had just graduated with a business degree. She was good at spotting poor work and could lay stone herself. We ran the business together with help from our stepdad Jerry, who was an accountant. My younger brother, Jerry Jr., was 15, and I promised him a summer job learning the trade. Though he had a talent for math and might not stick with masonry, I knew he'd be valuable no matter what path he chose. I was 30 when I met Melody. One Thursday night, she came to the bar with friends, and we felt an instant attraction. My cousin Billy, who owned the bar, often had live bands playing country music, and I watched Mel dance a few fast songs, admiring her grace. When she came to the bar as a slow song started, she grabbed my hand, saying, "I don't want to waste a good slow song. Let's dance." I was so surprised, I just followed her while my friends laughed. Dancing with Mel felt like magic. She moved so close, like we were the only two in the room. By the end of the song, I think I was already in love. She was about 5'9", and with heels, she could look me right in the eye. When the song ended, she didn't let go of my hand and pulled me to her table to meet her friends, though I couldn't remember their names. We talked until closing, and one of her friends urged her to kiss me and get my number before leaving. She kissed me, asked if I'd be there the next night, and told me to meet her at 7:30 for dinner. Then she was gone, leaving behind her perfume and the taste of her lips. Back at the bar, Billy teased me. "Not bad, Bandit. If she'd held out a hoop, you'd have jumped through it." My nickname came from my real name, Jesse James, and my dad had picked it because he admired the outlaw's Robin Hood reputation. I had a rough history with women. My first serious girlfriend broke up with me before I left for the military, saying she didn't want to wait for an uncertain future. We met again after I returned, but we'd both changed, and the spark was gone. The second was Cindy, a college volleyball star. She was tall, athletic, and incredibly arrogant, used to getting her way. She believed she was special, and the whole campus treated her like royalty because her team won several national championships. I wasn't bad-looking myself. 6'1", muscular from my masonry work with sandy brown hair, pale blue eyes, and a permanent tan from working outdoors. One day, Cindy and her entourage walked into a crowded bar where I was eating alone. She asked me to give up my table for her and her friends. Assuming I'd leave, she smiled confidently. I just smiled back and kept eating, surprising her by not giving in to her demands. After a couple of minutes, she snorted, "Are you going to leave or what? We're waiting." "When I'm done or a smaller table opens up, I'll gladly give it up. Or, since I have plenty of space, you're welcome to join me." One of the guys spoke up. "You can go stand at the bar." I smirked. "Standing while eating will make your legs even bigger. I'm already struggling to find a decent 14-year-old girl. Don't make it harder." He growled, "Maybe I'll make you leave." He was about 5'10" and looked fit, but his posture said he didn't know how to fight. I looked at him, took a sip of tea, ate a fry, and sighed. 3 outcomes here. 1, you knock me up, and everyone thinks you're an idiot for picking a fight with someone minding their business. 2, I knock you, and everyone thinks you deserved it for being an idiot. Or 3, you let me finish, and I'll be gone in a minute. Let your friends sit while you grab drinks. I'll be out of here by then." He pouted, and Cindy, watching all of this, finally said, "Brian, stop. Just get the drinks. We'll sit here if this gentleman shares." By then, I was done. I stood, pushed the chair out for the girl nearest me, and said, "Please take the table. I'm finished. Have a nice evening." I reached for my cane, revealing the cast on my leg from a student dropping a rock on my foot. Cindy's eyes widened. "Stay and let us buy you a beer," she offered. "Thanks, but I can't drink due to my meds." Brian came back, saw the cast, and smirked. He followed me outside, thinking I'd be an easy target. "You think that cast will save you?" "It'll make things easier," he said, threatening me. Without a word, I turned and jabbed my cane into his groin. He dropped instantly, groaning, and wet himself. I calmly said, "Don't get up until I'm gone. If you do, I'll assume you want trouble, and you won't like what happens next. Grow up." When I walked out, Cindy and her friends had noticed his absence and came out just in time to see our interaction. They helped him up and dusted him off. Cindy started asking around the restaurant about me and eventually tracked me down. One night when I walked into the bar and grill, she pointed to an empty chair. "I saved you a seat," she said. I was about to sit elsewhere when she touched my shoulder. "Please, just for a moment. We owe you an apology. Brian was an idiot and he's not with us anymore." I sensed sincerity and sat down. I was surprised to learn her friends weren't airheads. One was studying political science with a job offer from a lobbying group, another was heading to Yale, and a third was getting an MBA from Wharton. Cindy was majoring in sports psychology, planning to use it after her volleyball career. They discussed their futures and occasionally asked for my opinion. I chimed in when I could. When the conversation shifted to my work, one friend asked, "Wow, that's a niche market. Is it good money? What's your business plan?" I raised my hand. "It's great money. I'll never be rich, but I'll be comfortable. Most of my work comes from word of mouth, and my services aren't for everyone. I usually work on multi-million-dollar properties. Right now, I've got 2 major projects with developers and a restoration contract for the state college system. I've been doing this for 2 years, and tomorrow I'm flying out to pitch similar contracts in other states. I'll probably hire local masons to handle the new workload. Even when the economy struggled, I stayed busy because the wealthy always need quality work." Everyone was surprised, and Becca, a business major, spoke first. "I'm writing a paper on niche businesses. I might focus it on your company if you're okay with it." "Sure," I said, grinning. "It'll be good advertising. But you might need to travel for a deeper look since most of the work is out in the field." She smiled. "No problem. My parents fund anything school-related." Cindy didn't look thrilled but stayed quiet. Later, I found out she tried to talk Becca out of it. Becca refused, saying the report would boost her Wharton application and, "I'm not dating him." She smirked. "What he plans is another story." We ended up in a 2-year relationship, and I quickly learned that to keep her in check, I had to throw her off balance. She had a my way or else attitude, and I made it clear, "You may be the queen at school, but not with me. I want a partnership, where we both lead and follow." She smiled and said, "I'll be your queen and you'll be my king." For 18 months, I kept her guessing, even delaying Zex to maintain control. One night she got fed up and yelled, "Damn it, Bandit, man up and do me. What's wrong? Scared you won't be good enough?" I replied calmly, "I've heard all about your skills from others, but thanks for the offer, I'll pass. Good night, Sin." She tried to apologize and physically stop me, but I broke free and left. I didn't see her for 2 weeks, despite her calls and messages. When I finally returned, her last emails were nasty. She didn't handle rejection well. One night, I ran into Becca and her law school friend Carol at a bar. Carol grinned and asked, "Did Cindy dump you?" Becca laughed. "Look at his face. I bet you dumped her, didn't you, Jess?" I shrugged. "It was mutual. We had different ideas about relationships." Carol laughed. "I bet she wanted you to jump through hoops and you refused. She's been a mess since you left." Just then, Cindy walked in with a basketball player. She saw us and stormed over, leaving the guy trailing behind, trying to hold her hand. She snapped at him. "Let go of me. We're just friends." The guy, frustrated, said, "Why are you stuck on that redneck? He dumped you and he's a loser. He'll never support you like I can." Becca nearly fell off her chair, laughing. "What an idiot. You're not even in the pros yet, and that's no guarantee. Jesse owns a successful business, makes 6 figures, and that number's growing. Not bad for a redneck, huh, Dustin?" Just as Dustin was about to object, Carol stepped in. "Dustin, whatever you're thinking, stop. Look at him. Those muscles aren't from the gym, and he's been in combat twice. He could take you apart easily. Why don't you go sit at the bar? Becca and I will keep you company." They walked him out as he complained. Cindy sat down staring at me for a few minutes before saying, "The worst part about being spoiled is that it works. I know I'm arrogant and a control freak, but I'm a good person. Why don't we start over?" I stayed quiet, which made her uncomfortable, so she continued. "I regret that night. I thought I was a prize to be admired. I know I'm just a girl and there are better ones out there, but they'll never love you like I do. I'll wait for you, and you can set the pace." 4 months later, Cindy wanted to see where our relationship was headed. After not winning nationals, she blamed me for distracting her. She had an offer to play pro beach volleyball, with most of the money coming from endorsements. We talked it over and decided to get married, though we agreed to wait until after her first year. She traveled with me for a month, spending time together before her season started. When she left, it was hard. She cried as I almost had to push her onto the plane. I told her, "If you don't like it, come home. I can pay for your studies." She hugged me tighter. "I need to prove I can take care of myself. I signed a contract and I have to play." Her first season went well. She and her partner were ranked first. The string they wore on TV bothered me, but she laughed it off. "It's in the contract, honey. It's part of an ad campaign. You don't mind, do you?" I supported her, though we only saw each other once a month for a few days. When she finally came home, my mom started hinting at grandchildren. Meanwhile, my sister Becky was settling down with her wife. After Mom came to terms with Becky's life, she started pressuring them to adopt or do artificial insemination, which they were considering. After 4 weeks at home, Cindy became distant. I confronted her, and she eventually admitted, "I signed another contract for next season. They doubled the money and I couldn't turn it down." I was furious. We argued constantly. "You promised last year would be it," I said. Cindy, frustrated, screamed back at me, but when I wasn't paying attention, she stopped. In a quiet voice, she said, "I'll write a contract. If I don't quit next year, the marriage is off. Please, Bandit. This means so much to me." I looked at her and said, "You don't need a contract. If you don't stop next year, I'm gone. Got it?" She went pale and made promises, ones she didn't keep. Early the next year, her team's success continued, and her partner Jen even called to thank me for letting Cindy stay on tour. Jen mentioned this would be her last year, as she was moving on to teaching and coaching. She joked about how, if her marriage had been like ours, she might still be married. That comment left me uneasy. Later, when Cindy told me about Jen's call, I shot her a look. She went quiet. I asked, "What arrangement is Jen talking about?" Cindy tried to laugh it off, saying Jen was just scattered after her divorce, and reassured me, "I'll never make her mistake." When I pressed, she admitted Jen had an affair with a guy on the tour, which led to her divorce. Cindy promised, "I would never hurt you like that." Normally, Cindy called me every Monday and Tuesday, but one week I heard nothing, despite my calls and emails. The following week, she came home unexpectedly, furious that I hadn't been answering her calls. I told her I was just following her lead. We had a huge argument, and in a fit of anger, I mentioned her Spanish boyfriend. She went pale, and I left. 2 days later, Cindy showed up at my work begging to talk. She insisted nothing was happening and promised to quit the tour after the season. She said everything I wanted to hear, and I believed her. She did 2 more photo shoots, but one day, while waiting on my truck tires, I saw a golf magazine featuring Juan Pablo. In one picture, he was kissing Cindy at a beach volleyball match. The article mentioned he attended her events to support his girlfriend. I was furious. I ignored her calls and flew to her next match. When I got to her hotel, Juan opened the door, turning pale when he saw me. Cindy wasn't there. I called her and she cheerfully claimed to be at dinner with her partner, Yan. I chatted for a few minutes while Juan stood frozen. After hanging up, I turned to Juan and said, "I was in the military. I spent 2 years in the desert eliminating people. I won't eliminate you, but if you lie, I'll break your wrists and knees. You'll live, but you won't walk or use your hands properly. It's your choice." Would I have done it? No, but I was so angry that Juan believed me. He started spilling everything. "It started at the end of the first season," Juan admitted. "Not with me, but another player. Cindy said you were okay with it, that you had an arrangement. She told me it would end after the season, and she was excited to marry you." "Where is she now?" I asked. Juan panicked and confessed they were at another hotel. I grabbed him by the throat and warned him not to tip her off. Later, I watched Cindy and her new partner walk into their hotel. I waited a few minutes before kicking the door open. Cindy nearly fainted when she saw me. Her partner tried to act tough, but I quickly pinned him. "How long?" I demanded. 3 or 4 months, he stammered. "You knew she was engaged and you still went along with it?" I asked, noting he was also engaged. He begged for mercy. Cindy silently fixed her dress, and I realized time was running out as people gathered in the hallway. I let him go, punched him, and said, "Good luck playing golf now." To Cindy, I said, "Keep the ring. We're done." I left, called the hotel manager, and offered to cover repairs and medical bills, then got out of there. The next day, the tournament announcers downplayed his injury as an accident. Rumors spread fast, and he flew home, newly single. Cindy and her partner played poorly for the rest of the season. Jen retired, and Cindy played for 4 more seasons before earning her PhD. She tried to contact me for months, even telling my mom she'd fly out to talk. My mom laughed and told her off, and Cindy never came. For 2 years, I had trust issues with women. Then I met Melody, and things changed. She was a trauma nurse, and our schedules aligned. We took it slow: dinners, dancing, museums, and baseball games. It wasn't long before I was head over heels for her. We never saw each other on her work days, but she always called during breaks. She lived with 2 other nurses, and they had a strict no-boyfriends rule to avoid drama. One stole another's boyfriend while she was asleep, so we had to set rules. Tired of motel rooms, I started house hunting and asked my business contacts for leads. They teased me, saying, "She's got you, huh?" One designer advised, "Let her help choose the house." I took the advice and involved Melody, using my insider knowledge to find homes. The first few didn't impress her, but we found a 4-bedroom house on 3 acres just outside town that she loved. She smiled and said, "I'm thinking about tree houses." I took the week off, finalized the deal, and got a great price. On Friday, we went back to the house, and I asked, "Could you be happy living here?" "I'd love it." "Why?" she asked. "Because we bought it, I need you to pick out furniture. Is that okay?" Before she could answer, I knelt and proposed, telling her I wanted to spend my life with her. She fainted from shock. When she recovered, she said, "I love you, Jesse, but I can't marry you yet. Give me 6 months and ask again." I wasn't expecting that, and I felt disappointed, but she reassured me. We went furniture shopping the next day, and her comment about the rocking chair, "This might come in handy in a year or 2, gave me hope. Later, I introduced her to my family. My mom and Becky liked her, my little brother was smitten, and my stepdad's smirk showed approval. Only Grandma wasn't thrilled. The following Friday, I arrived at the new house to find she had already set up a dining room and guest room. She was unclothed on our new bed, teasing, "I was going to start without you. I want to christen every piece of furniture." That weekend, we barely made it past the bedroom. The next weekend, I was at a bar waiting for her when a guy punched me. After she left, I stayed for a few more drinks. As I headed home, 2 fire shots struck my car. Instinct kicked in, and I dove behind my SUV. The drunk guy from earlier was coming after me, shouting, "I'll make sure you never mess up another husband." I realized he wasn't finished with me. My stepdad's advice rang in my ears: never leave a live snake behind. I waited silently, and when he was close, I threw my shoe to distract him. As he turned, I grabbed his weapon hand and yanked him back, causing the weapon to drop. I knocked him until I realized I had to stop before it went too far. I dragged him into my truck and drove to an abandoned barn. When he started waking up, I pulled him out, letting his head fall on the gravel. After splashing water on his face, he groggily realized what was happening. "I didn't plan to destroy you," I said, kicking his weapon away, "but I wanted to scare you." "A .32? Really?" He nodded weakly. "What do you want me to say? I'm not okay with you seeing my wife. Sooner or later, I'll get even. You might as well finish me now." Despite the situation, he wasn't backing down. I slapped him lightly and asked, "I'm not with anyone's wife. What can I do to end this?" Defeated, he told me to check his wallet. I pulled out a picture of Melody, and my heart sank. It was her, younger, in a wedding dress. "Is that her?" he asked. "You didn't know, did you? How does it feel?" I couldn't respond. After talking a bit, we started drinking from the bottle of whiskey I had for the new house. The next morning, I woke up to find him holding the .32. "You're right, it's not much, but I wouldn't want to be shot by it," he said, putting it away. We talked more in the truck. He admitted he always suspected this would happen, given their age difference and time apart. He worked weekends as a trucker, leaving her plenty of time to stray. I asked what he planned to do. "Divorce her, of course. She's yours now if you still want her," he said with a bitter laugh. I admitted I wasn't sure I could trust her. We drove back to his car, and I reminded him not to forget his weapon. "Keep it," he said. "I don't need it to remember what almost happened." As he drove off, I asked one last time, "What are you going to do?" "You're lucky. You can walk away. I'm getting a divorce. If it gets messy, let me know and I'll testify for you." I watched him drive away, feeling both relief and loss. Later, I emailed Melody, "I'm not running, but I need time. Don't contact me until next weekend. I'll think about everything, but don't expect me to believe much." She replied quickly, "Thank you for letting me talk. There's a lot you don't know, and I want to explain. I'll be at your house next Saturday at 4 o'clock. Believe it or not, I love you." The week dragged on as I struggled with what to say. My coworkers noticed something was off and gave me space. As Saturday approached, my dread grew. When she arrived, I made her sit at the kitchen table, the one she spent weeks choosing. As she started to speak, I cut her off. "Ground rules," I said firmly. No I love yous or apologies. Just explain why you went to bars and dated while married. Could you live with me doing the same thing? Tears filled her eyes. After a few moments, she began. She grew up poor, raised by a heavy drinker father after her mom left. She married Jerry for stability, not love. When their schedules conflicted, she started going out with friends to ease her loneliness. She always wore her rings, but then she met me. I didn't love Jerry like I love you, she admitted, but I respected him. I didn't know how to tell him. You should have left him when you realized how you felt. Instead, you used him as a backup, I said, frustrated. I know, she whispered. I shook my head. Even if we stayed together, how could I trust you? What happens when I'm gone for work and you're lonely again? She cried, but I pushed on. It's about trust, Mel. I need to trust my partner completely, and right now I don't think that's you. She sat quietly, then said, I understand, but no one will ever love you as much as I do. Even if we never get back together, I'll prove that to you. She left without another word. We spoke only twice after that, with little progress. Eventually, she started emailing me. For months, the emails ended with her begging for another chance, though they became less frequent over time. She mentioned therapy and going with Jerry a couple of times. After 7 months, she stopped writing. Her last email read, My dear Jess, this will be my final message. I'm officially divorced now, the second best moment in my life. The first was meeting you. Therapy helped me realize I was too immature and selfish to marry Jerry. I stayed with him out of fear, but it was doomed from the start. I'm living with 2 other nurses now, and I finally feel independent. In honor of my divorce, I'm giving you a gift. I'm letting you go. I realize now that if I were you, I wouldn't trust me either. I hope you find someone who loves you as much as I did, and still do. Mel. I stared at the screen, finger hovering over the delete button, but I couldn't do it. It was too painful to read again, so I saved it instead. That's how I drifted through life. If it weren't for work, I might have lost it altogether. It took almost 10 months before I went on a date again. She was the sister of a contractor I worked with, a witty, beautiful woman who enjoyed dancing close. I had fun, but there was no spark. After 2 more dates, she found someone else and we parted amicably. During this time, I saw Mel twice. Once at a stoplight, I spotted her through the window of a bistro, smiling with friends. I sat there so long that the car behind me honked. She turned and saw me as I drove away. The second time was at a club, where I was on a date with Tina. When our eyes met, Mel burst into tears and ran out. Her friend Gwen stopped by my table and angrily accused me of rubbing my new relationship in Mel's face. I stayed calm. It's been almost a year. We were bound to run into each other. Tell her I'm sorry if I upset her, but she needs to move on. Gwen muttered, "A-hole," as she walked away. Tina, noticing the tension, asked for the full story, and after I explained, she said, "You're not over her. I saw your face when you noticed her." Jerry, who had started coming to my cousin's bar, and I eventually became friends. He admitted he still missed her sometimes. He told me one of her nurse friends mentioned they called her Nun because she hadn't dated since me. She blamed it on how much I had spoiled her. Jerry shared that Mel had been writing letters of apology as part of her therapy. I admitted I'd received one, but didn't elaborate. Jerry had moved on, though. He started dating a military widow, and they were a great match. I helped sponsor his stepdaughter's softball team, and we even planned his bachelor party. Watching Jerry's happiness made me think about my own future, wondering if I'd ever be in the stands cheering on my own kids. I threw myself into work, taking on more contracts than we could handle. My family eventually convinced me to slow down, reminding me that quality was key. I passed on some jobs to competitors and got things back on track. Then I ran into Becca, a college friend, who offered me a contract to build a small stone cottage. I agreed, and as I worked, I discovered an old stash hidden in a chimney. Whiskey, letters, and a wedding ring. I returned the items to the family, who eventually donated them to a historical society. The story made the papers, sparking a wave of chimney excavations. Becca later invited me to a party to show off my work. While there, she mentioned she still kept in touch with Cindy, my ex. She showed me photos. Cindy had cut her hair and gained some weight, but she looked happy with her second husband, David. Becca told me Cindy had come clean about her past and was trying to make this marriage work. Surprisingly, I was genuinely happy for her. I hadn't thought about her in years, but it seemed like she had finally found peace. Meanwhile, I stopped dating, trying to figure myself out. Melody's ghost still lingered in my mind. On a whim, I sent her an email. "Mel, I wasn't trying to make a statement when I saw you at the club. It was a coincidence, And I had no intention of hurting you. If it's any consolation, it ruined my night too. Jess, she replied the next day. I'm sorry I ruined your evening. I know it's over between us and we'll never be together again, but I can't stop loving you. I've given up trying. Time hasn't healed me. It's only made me miss you more. I got a job offer at another hospital far enough away that we won't run into each other. I think I'll take it and start fresh. Maybe then I'll finally move on. I wish you happiness, Jess. Mel. P.S. If you ever want to talk, just text. I thought about it. We didn't see each other much, but if moving would help her, I was fine with it. Maybe one of us could find happiness. And here we were, dancing. The feeling was both familiar and different. Jerry bribed the orchestra to play 3 slow songs in a row. I would have stopped after the first, but she held on. When the music finally ended, she clutched my arm. Will you sit with me for a while, please? I'll beg if I have to. To avoid embarrassment, I agreed. She led me to a small table in the back where we could talk. She made small talk for a minute before I stopped her. Just say what you really mean, Mel. She looked at me, her face determined. You. I want you back. I've tried to let you go, but I can't stop loving you. I can see it in your eyes. You still care about me. Why don't we start over? Give me one chance. If it doesn't work, I'll leave you alone. Please, just one date. She kissed me on the cheek and left. I watched her talk to Jerry and Anna before disappearing out the door. Jerry sat down next to me. Well? He asked. Well, what? I replied. Are you going to give her another chance? You deserve it. I stared at him in disbelief, but he only sighed and added, Since meeting you, she hasn't been with anyone else. She even apologized in a letter, saying she caught something at work and needed 6 months to clear it. She's been through a lot. I thought about it for 2 weeks. Then I called Mel and invited her to a concert in a neighboring town. After a long pause, she quietly said, Yes. We met at the playground before the concert. She wore a pale yellow sundress, and her smile lit up when she saw me. We walked around, window shopped, and watched the show. When the duo performed a song about rekindling romance, it brought a smile to her face. After the concert, I suggested we grab pizza at Yanni's, one of our favorite spots. She agreed, tears in her eyes. We shared a pizza, and afterward, I walked her to her car. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, and drove off. I stood there wondering what it all meant. We went out 2 more times. A movie, where she snuggled up to me, and a day at the local fair. She laughed at the exhibits and admired quilts, reminding me of a time when she said she wanted to make quilts for our future children. I kept quiet, but I pocketed a flyer for a quilting club as a potential birthday gift. At the fair, we kissed for the first time while watching fireworks. It wasn't planned, it just happened. We didn't speak afterward, and when I drove her home, she simply walked into her house without a word. For the next 3 weeks, we didn't see each other. We talked on the phone, but she seemed distant, and I began to wonder if the kiss had been a mistake. I called home to let my family know I'd finished the project and would be back by Thursday. They were relieved, but worried I was overworking myself. I sighed, tossing my dirty laundry in the foyer, deciding to wash it later. I needed a shower first. Since buying the apartment, the only major change I made was remodeling the bathroom. It now had a huge shower with multiple nozzles and options for full flow, massage, or mist. Ironically, I had it designed with Mel in mind, but it wasn't finished until 2 weeks after we broke up. Living alone for a while, you stop thinking about what you're wearing. Then I heard a giggle. Mel was sitting on my bed. What? How? Why? I stammered. She smiled. Your mom told me you'd be home tonight. You didn't ask for the keys back, remember? I'm here because I need to talk to you. Now get dressed and meet me in the living room. She grinned, teasing. Or you could stay like that and I'll join you. Flustered, I quickly grabbed some clothes. When I came out, she was sitting in the rocking chair smiling at me. I have something to say, and I need you to let me finish without interrupting, she said. I sat down on the couch we'd picked out together, memories flooding back. She started, I know I've seemed off lately. It's because I miss what we had, and I want it back. I want you back. I've realized you still love me, and I still love you. But love isn't the problem, it's trust. I lied to you and hurt you. I need to earn your trust again, so here's my plan. Let me move back in. You can install cameras, put a GPS tracker on my car, and even make me wear a bracelet like those criminals do. If that's not enough, I'll wear a chastity belt to prove you can trust me. She lowered her head, embarrassed. I gently explained, You don't need to do any of that. If we tried, it would destroy our relationship. Trust can't be forced. You'd end up resenting it, and I can't live like that." She started crying. I pulled her close and comforted her. "Is it over?" she whispered. "No, it's just beginning. What you were willing to do shows me we can make it work. Let's take our time and rebuild from here." Her smile, full of hope, reminded me of sunlight after a storm. The next morning, I planned to take her to breakfast and grab clothes from her apartment. She was working a double shift but would return for the weekend. I met her roommates, Amanda and Beth. Amanda, a twice-divorced blonde, had a crush on Mel, while Beth had anger issues and was in therapy after her ex-husband left her. As soon as Mel left the room, they attacked me verbally. Amanda accused me of never forgiving Mel and eventually hurting her. Beth piled on, calling me an unforgiving idiot who would make Mel jump through hoops before dumping her again. Furious, I shot back. "This has nothing to do with you two. Amanda, you're just in love with her. And Beth, you don't want anyone to be happy. Your husband deserves a medal for putting up with you." At that moment, Mel reappeared, catching the tail end of the argument. Amanda turned on her, saying, "Mel, this guy isn't going to forgive you. He's just waiting for you to get comfortable so he can hurt you again." I was beyond mad. Pride isn't a bad thing, Amanda. It lets you live true to your beliefs. It helps you stand tall even when everything else falls apart. Mel stayed silent, and I sighed. "Mel's ready. We're leaving." I took her hand and left the apartment, feeling relieved to be out of there. On the way to the car, Mel stayed quiet, and instead of taking her suitcase inside, she placed it in the trunk. I was confused. "Mel, why not leave your suitcase here? You don't have to drive around with it. It'll be safe, and you can grab it later." She avoided eye contact. "I'll pass. I'll probably just go home and crash after work. I need some time to think." That hit me hard. "What's going on? Earlier, you regretted volunteering for the job, and now after listening to those angry women, you don't want to spend time with me." Frustrated, I added, "Fine, go find someone else. But I've lived without you once, and if you start playing games, I'm done. I want my key back." I could tell she realized her mistake, but I wasn't in the mood to be reasonable. After everything we went through to get back together, was she really pulling away? I told myself I didn't need her, but I did. I missed her more than before and was angry at myself for getting my hopes up again. To distract myself, I threw myself into work, tackling a backlog of projects. I stayed away from home for 3 weeks, only taking a day off to do laundry and check on the house. When I got back, I was shocked to see her car in my driveway. Mel rushed out of the house and hugged me tightly, nearly knocking us both over. She was sobbing and mumbling incoherently. I had to force her wrists behind her back to stop her from gripping me too tightly. "Shut up!" I snapped, my raised voice surprising both of us. I stood up, leaving her on the ground, but her whimpers turned into screams. Despite wanting to shut her out, I couldn't ignore her pain. I picked her up and carried her inside, not too gently, and got her some water. "Drink," I ordered. After a few sips, I asked, "How did you get here?" She whispered, "I broke the window." I couldn't believe it. "You what?" "I broke the window and used the spare key. I had a fight with Amanda and Beth. They kicked me out and I came here. You didn't respond to my calls or messages. I waited, hoping you'd come back. I just wanted to be near you. If you want me to leave, I will." Kicking her out seemed too harsh. "Not right now. Order a pizza. I'm starving. I'll be back after a shower." When I came out, dressed in sweats, Mel had freshened up, looking younger and hopeful. The pizza arrived, and we sat down to eat. I noticed she looked thinner. "Are you on a diet?" I asked. She shook her head. I haven't felt like eating much." After dinner, we sat in the living room. I didn't sit next to her, which disappointed her, but I needed to clear my head. "Tell me the truth, Mel. We both want to be together, but how can I trust you again? What can you do to prove it?" She had a plan. Couples counseling. A friend at work went through it, and it helped her and her boyfriend work through their issues. I think it's the only way to fix this. I'm willing to try, even if we realize we're not meant to be. This half-life is eliminating me. Please think about it. I agreed to consider it, and she nodded. Then she started dragging her suitcase toward the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, surprised. "To a motel. I'll look for an apartment next week. I know you don't want me here," she said quietly. Instead of letting her leave, I picked up her suitcase and unpacked it. "Help me put this away," I said, teasing her by twirling one of her strings. Blushing, she smiled through her tears. "Fine, but you have to take them off as often as possible." "Agreed," I said, "but there will be some rules. Make an appointment for counseling, and let's take this slow." She agreed, and we drank wine together, savoring the moment. "We'll make it work, Mel, but I need to know I can trust you completely. If either of us feels it won't work, we have to be honest." She nodded, then added, "And I need you to spend more time with me, not just one day a week, and promise to attend all our counseling sessions, no excuses." I promised, and we ended the conversation there. We didn't make love that night. It didn't feel right. Instead, I lay awake, wondering if we were finally on the right path. The next day, we started couples counseling. I was surprised she chose a male counselor, but she explained that he had the highest success rate. After individual sessions, where we both expressed our hopes, we found our answers were more similar than we expected. When we started joint sessions with the counselor, he was calm but direct. Mel would sometimes cry, and though I didn't cry, there were times he pushed me enough to make me want to strike him. During one session, Mel admitted what I had suspected. She stayed with Jerry as a safety net, in case I wasn't the man she hoped for. When she realized she wanted to be with me, she started the divorce process but didn't file right away because she wasn't sure how I felt. "That's ridiculous," I said when she finally admitted it. The counselor agreed. "Melanie, is that really true?" he asked. "During those 6 months, you didn't feel sure of Jesse's love, even while staying with him on weekends? You still shared a bed with Jerry, exchanged caresses, and then did the same with Jesse. You only filed for divorce after getting caught." Mel suddenly shouted, surprising both of us. "You think I don't know what I did? I betrayed them both and ruined my chances for happiness." The counselor remained composed. "I don't think that's entirely true, or you two wouldn't be here. But I think we've gone as far as we can in these sessions." Both of us were shocked. "But we're not healed yet," Mel protested. "No, but you've reached the point where the rest is up to you. You love each other, that's clear. But the question is, can Jesse trust you again? You're both unsure whether the pain and effort are worth it. I can't make that decision for you. If you can forgive each other, you'll never regret it. If you can't, it's time to walk away. I wish you both luck." After that session, Mel and I tried to move forward for 3 months. We had good days, but triggers would cause tension. Things got stressful. She called me every night and even sent pictures to prove she was at home. But it got tiresome. One night I told her, "Stop sending pictures. Stop locking yourself in the house. You made a mistake, and if you learned from it, we'll be fine. If not, it's over." She seemed to understand and soon started going out with friends. One night she called and thanked me for trusting her. That felt good. But even with the progress, I sensed something was still off. She had become quieter recently, and I worried we were nearing the end. Then we went to a flea market, one of her favorite places. Watching her browse with such grace, I saw her smile at me, but it quickly faded, replaced by sadness. I realized then that if I didn't change, I'd lose her. As we left, a sudden thunderstorm hit. Mel flinched, scared of storms, so I put my arm around her. I went to get the truck, praying for a way to break through my emotional walls. A song came on the radio, slow dancing, swaying to the music, and I glanced at a bumper sticker that read, "Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain." I knew what I had to do. I stepped out into the pouring rain, held out my hand and said, "If you love me, come dance with me. This is our last chance." Everyone was watching, and Mel, terrified of storms, hesitated but eventually stepped into the rain and took my hand. The song ended after a minute, but it was enough. She faced her greatest fear for me. We laughed, cried, and made love when we got home. 9 months later, I found myself standing in line for the tallest roller coaster. Mel had told me she would one day ask me to prove my love in return. As I was strapped into the seat, she let go of my hand and stepped back. "You're not coming with me?" I asked, panicked. Tears welled up in her eyes as she smiled. "I can't," she said softly. "Why not?" I yelled as the ride started. That's when I saw the sign. Pregnant women are not allowed on this ride.
This weekend began just like any other Saturday. Hank woke up later than usual, and he gave his wife of 17 years a morning kiss. She grumbled, "Hank, let me sleep. I can't catch a break with you at night or in the morning, and the girls are probably awake by now." Hank replied, "You're right. They're grown-ups. They won't barge into our bedroom. Let me sleep." Hank got out of bed, put on a robe, and headed to the shower. On his way, he heard some noise and commotion in their eldest daughter Alice's room. He realized that Gwen, her sister, was pulling her out of bed, so he left them be. After freshening up, he dressed and made his way to the kitchen. His daughters, having had enough of waiting, were already sitting at the table. Alice asked, "Are we having breakfast today? Are you hungry? We still have to go to school." Hank responded, "Why? I don't know. You girls are on New Year's vacation. You're going to Grandma's." Alice inquired, "And you're on vacation, and you have a long weekend. It's all Mom's decision." Hank suggested, "You can make your own breakfast." Gwen added, "We could, but Mom won't let us. She thinks we'd mess up the pans and burn everything. All she knows how to make is scrambled eggs." Hank asked, "Do you want oatmeal or semolina porridge like they have in England?" Alice said, "Oatmeal, please, sir." Hank smiled. "Or in this case, oatmeal, miss. Daddy, we'll leave the oats for the horses." Hank instructed, "Make semolina without lumps. Done and done. Now go wash your face and brush your teeth. The porridge will be ready in 15 minutes. Hank quickly prepared breakfast for his daughters. Meanwhile, Judy came out of the bedroom and went into the bathroom. The daughters sat down to eat, and Judy soon returned, her hair neatly combed. Hank looked at his wife, dressed in his shirt, and even after all these years, she still excited him. He recognized her beauty, even though every man has his own idea of what's beautiful in a woman. He loved her, but there was a significant barrier between them. Judy took her seat at the table and said to her daughters, "Finish your meal and get ready slowly. Today, Daddy will take you to your grandmother's." Alice protested, "Mom, you promised we'd go to the ski center for a week. We've already prepared our ski gear, and we wanted to celebrate New Year's Eve together." Judy replied, "Girls, in life, we don't always get what we want, but we'll definitely go to the ski center for spring break when there's no more snow. Or should we go to Palmer? They say there's year-round snow in the mountains. Now finish up and get ready." Hank didn't like the idea of sending the kids to his mother-in-law, especially after the deception about the trip they were preparing for. He sensed a cooling in their relationship, which coincided with the arrival of Richard, the new commercial director at Judy's workplace. Hank knew Judy had known Richard from university, but she hadn't mentioned her new boss to him. It worried him, but he trusted that his wife would resist the temptation of an affair with Richard. He considered meeting Richard and talking to him, but he decided it would only worsen his relationship with Judy. Nevertheless, he kept a close eye on his wife. To his knowledge, nothing had happened between them except some light flirting. Judy's decision to send the children to her parents today meant something was about to happen during the long New Year's weekend, and she would likely share it with them. He was prepared for this conversation and kept a recorder ready to understand what she would say. As it started, his tears dried and his heart grew firm. He saw his wife potentially tearing their family apart. His priority was to keep his daughters safe. Hank knew that a conversation was coming today. Kira had already warned him about it. What Judy didn't know was that before the conversation began, Hank went to the bathroom, washed his hands, turned on the recorder, and concealed it in his breast pocket. Then, he returned to the kitchen and sat at the table. Judy remained silent for a minute. Then she looked at Hank, smiled briefly, and her smile disappeared. With a serious tone, she declared, "Hank, there's something you and I need to talk about right now." Her words left no doubt that Hank wouldn't like this conversation. He didn't let it get to him and looked away from his food, asking, "Is something wrong?" "Hank, nothing is wrong. You know I love you. I've loved you and only you for years. You've been an amazing lover, husband, and a great father to our girls. I want to grow old with you, and maybe even die on the same day. What's stopping us? I'm a trained sociologist from our university, but only a few of us actually work in that field. Those who do use population surveys and data analysis to understand what's happening in society, identify the causes of negative issues, and offer suggestions for improvement. While I work in marketing, I'm involved in marketing research. Nevertheless, I keep a close eye on all the latest sociological developments." "Judy, everything seems a bit unclear and complicated. Can you give me the gist of your question? I've read about what leads to marriage problems and want to reduce the chances of anything going wrong in our relationship." What could go wrong for us? We should be as proactive as possible to avoid common pitfalls that can lead to failed marriages. Judy, it seems like you've been reading some convoluted ideas from someone trying to grab attention. I don't buy into these sociological conclusions at all. Can you tell me what this nonsense is all about? Judy snorted and declared, Hank, I'm quite serious. I'm concerned about our family, the possibility of us drifting apart. Our actions today might lead to distance between us and eventually end our relationship. So, tell me, what should we do? I'm not a sociologist. Maybe we should see a psychologist. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I believe we need a break from our marriage. We should explore our own natures and experiences with other people and places. This way, when we come back together, we'll have a broader perspective to support our relationship. How long should this break last? A month? A year? No, I think a 2-week holiday weekend would suffice. Is that why the kids are going to your mom's instead of the ski resort? We could have sent them to your parents' place, but I'd already made plans with my mom. So, you're telling me that you and your lover concocted this whole sociological theory just to get my consent for a long weekend with your lover? Judy's suggestion left Hank completely stunned. Her bold proposal was shocking, though not entirely surprising, given his suspicions. Nevertheless, her words hurt him deeply. Judy, still not sure what you're getting at, Hank asked, Can you clarify? I have no idea who you're talking about as a lover. I know you may not like it, but you'll see that nothing will change between us. I'll make sure you're happy when we reunite. Yes, it's selfish, but I have my reasons. I want to grow old with you. You may not understand that now, but you will, and you'll apologize. You don't even know who the lover is. I'm talking about your new commercial director, Richard. You had a passionate affair with him back in college, and only when he got tired of you did he break it off. After that, you quickly moved on to me. Not a word was said to me about your former classmate becoming your boss. And you're wrong about a lot of other things, too. What am I mistaken about? You're wrong to think that nothing will change. Everything will change, or rather, it has already changed. What has changed? Your attitude toward me and our kids has changed. Everything in our family is changing today. Hank, I love you, and I don't know what you're imagining. I still love you. I don't know how you'll explain our divorce to your parents or to Alice and Gwen. What will they think of their parents' divorce? Hank, what are you talking about? We're not getting divorced, and our parents don't need to be involved in our personal affairs. Sociology is a precise science, and you don't need to fit our situation into some theory you and your lover came up with. I can see that you're overcomplicating things, so I'll postpone it. You take the girls, come back, and we'll sit down to work things out. Judy, we're not resolving anything. I'm simply leaving, but you can't do this to me. I can, and I will. I won't do what you suggested. My decision to divorce was spontaneous. I just decided it now, Hank. But I said I was calling it off. Yes, you did. And then you said that when I got back, we'd sit down and talk about it. So, you're going to enjoy your free long weekend? As I drive the girls around, you can consult with your Richard. Alice came into the kitchen and announced, Daddy, we're ready to go. Girls, I'll be ready in 5 minutes. Hank quickly dressed, grabbed his laptop, slung on his backpack, and without saying goodbye to his wife, headed downstairs. He started the car, waited for it to warm up a bit, and then the girls hopped into the back seat, and they drove off. Judy watched them from the window. Bewildered, Hank cautiously merged onto the main road. The atmosphere in the car remained silent. Finally, Alice spoke. Daddy, Grandma lives on the other side of the road. I know, dear, but you were promised a ski lodge, and that's where we're going now. We'll figure out where to stay. Dad, are you and Mom getting a divorce? Why would you say that, Dad? We overheard you guys arguing in the kitchen today, and I'm on your side. Aren't you, Gwen? I'm on Dad's side, too. But where are we going to live? Girls, we'll stay at my mom's house. I'll drop you off at school, pick up your books and clothes. For now, let's put all these worries aside and enjoy our vacation. You deserve it. Judy glanced away from the car, took out her phone, and dialed Richard, who picked up immediately. Richard, it's Judy. I've got a problem. No worries. I'm alone. Has your husband left yet? He's leaving tonight. He just went to the store. He's probably on his way. What's going on? He didn't react as we expected. He didn't believe me. Who are you referring to? My husband. I offered him the 2-week separation we talked about. And did he agree? Turns out he's aware of your past and our connection from university. He's talking about getting a divorce. That's not good. It's going to cause a major uproar. It'll reach the office gossip mill, and eventually, Kira will hear about it. Kira? I'm not interested in divorcing my wife. You've never been interested, have you? Tell me. So, what do I do now? Is your husband back already? No, he still has to drop the girls off at my parents' and then return. I'm sure he'll come home and he's not leaving. Tell him you've decided there's no temporary separation. I did. He didn't believe me. He thought I'd convince him to go along with it when he got back. When will he be here? I think it'll take him 3 or 4 hours. That's our plan then. Tell him you've made your decision and there's no separation. Right now we need to let his anger subside, and we can't let this reach our workplace under any circumstances. Otherwise, it will complicate things. Judy ended the call, feeling relieved with Richard's support. She pondered the situation, and recalling the old saying about the way to a man's heart, decided to set up the table and avoid the trouble of cooking. She got dressed and went to a cafe, ordering some takeout. She also brought a bottle of wine and placed a corkscrew beside it. She set out 2 glasses and heated up the appetizers she'd purchased in the microwave. In the living room, she turned on the TV and settled into an armchair. She wondered if her brief affair with an old flame was worth jeopardizing her family. Now, convincing her husband would be incredibly challenging, and she wasn't sure how much he knew about her relationship with Richard. She probably shouldn't have revealed to her husband that her former classmate had become her boss. She knew he'd find out eventually. As it turned out, Hank knew about her involvement with Richard and that he'd left her. It was true. Richard had vanished from her life and then suddenly reappeared. When Judy learned that he would be their commercial director, she felt an unexpected attraction. She realized it was just a fling, nothing more. Their first one-on-one conversation confirmed it. Richard had told her, "Judy, I've always liked you, but I can't risk ruining my family. Although I'm not ready to cut off contact with you, it must remain very discreet. You're married too, as far as I know." Life had shown her the folly of her decision. Their discussions in the study had hinted at a scientific foundation, but it appeared they had underestimated something. 4 hours had gone by, and Hank hadn't returned. He should have been back by now. Judy called her mom's phone, and though there was a slight delay, her mom answered. "Daughter, I'm here. I just called to check on how you're doing. What's happening?" "It's wintertime out there, and the darkness falls early. We're sitting with Grandpa, and we're having a bit of an argument." "What's the argument about?" "Just the usual, the old man's way. He wanted a drink, and I refused, but he found where I hid the bottle. And you? How are you? When will you bring your granddaughter to visit?" Judy knew from her mom's conversation that Hank hadn't arrived. After the call with her mom, she phoned Hank's parents again, and it was Hank's father, a retired military officer, who picked up. "Judy, is that you? Come on, be honest. I thought I'd call to see how you're doing. Judy, don't try to deceive me. You're looking for Hank and the kids, right? He warned us about this. So he was at your place?" "No, he didn't come. He called and said you were getting a divorce. That's absurd. We had a misunderstanding, but we're not getting a divorce over something like that. I get that it's not just between you two. It's related to some guy from your work." "What did he say?" "He told me that this morning during breakfast, you proposed a 2-week separation. When he didn't agree, you said you'd cancel it but discuss it when he returned. Is that what happened?" "No. Hank said he's had enough of discussions, and he's decided on a divorce. He's gone to sort it out and won't be back. Although he assumed you were still at home waiting for him, ruffling his feathers. But I don't have any dates planned." "Judy, that's not true either. Hank knows about the man you're seeing and when. I suggested he drive up there and figure it out in person, but he said, 'Dad, I'm not interested. I have daughters, and they're on my side.' Where did he go? He didn't tell us. We were so upset that we didn't even ask. If he calls, tell him he misunderstood everything. I did my best for our family, but now I see that I did something wrong. I don't know my daughter. We've been together with my wife for a century, and even in the toughest times, we never thought of separation. Who put these absurd thoughts in your head? And if you love another man, why torment everyone? If you're ready for a lover to run away from your husband and children, just pack your bags and leave. Don't ruin life for yourself and others. Hank will get over it, and maybe he'll be better off." He's not an old or unattractive man, and the girls will be fine with him." "What are you talking about? There will be no divorce." "That's your opinion. I know my son, and you don't seem to know him. I just need to explain everything to him, and he'll realize he was wrong. Whatever. He'll call. I'll tell him." Judy called Richard's phone, and a woman answered unexpectedly. "I'm here. Excuse me, I'm looking for Richard. Who are you?" "My name is Judy. We work together." "Oh, I know. Let me tell you, honey, I kicked him out. Don't call him. He doesn't have a phone. Is something wrong?" "You don't know? I've moved to 2 different cities because of this cheater and womanizer, but I'm not leaving this new house." "Where's Richard?" "How should I know? I kicked him out. Maybe he's at your place." "He doesn't know where I live. Why would he be at my place?" "He knows everything, including your address. He's with you at work. But he wasn't the only one involved with you and had plans. He intended to meet all of you while I was on vacation." "Except I wasn't going anywhere. Hank and his daughters were going to a ski resort out of town. He knew some of the staff there, called one of them on the way. It turned out that Mark, a former classmate of his, went up the mountain and became the director of the base. After explaining the situation to him, Hank asked to accommodate him and the girls for the winter vacation. Mark replied, "Hank, anything for you. A house for 3 people? That's a dream come true. Great. I have a company waiver and 3 cabins available. I'll reserve one for you." "Excellent, but I have a request. If someone calls, don't confirm that I'm with my daughters on this base vacation." "All right. I'll reserve the cabin for you." "When are you coming?" "We're about an hour and a half away. I can't drive too fast. The roads are slippery." "Okay, I'll set the table in your cabin at the entrance. Just tell them you're here to see Mark, and they'll direct you." An hour and a half later, they reached the ski lodge's gates. They informed the gatekeeper that they were there to meet with Mark, who directed them where to go. There was a sheltered parking lot near the lodge, and Hank parked the car there. They took their belongings and entered the house. Mark was waiting at the table. Seeing them arrive, he said, "Hurry up. Everything on the table is getting cold. You're always in a rush. Let my girls freshen up, wash their hands, and explore a bit. There are 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 on the ground floor." Alice and Gwen, taking their things, headed upstairs. They had already changed into their tracksuits and found the room satisfactory. Hank's daughters were growing up and looking good. "Where's Judy? Why hasn't she come?" "That's a separate story. I'll tell you later. Let's toast to our meeting. You're eager and yet slow." The friends raised their glasses in a toast and reminisced, occasionally interrupted by Hank's daughters' questions. Eventually, Gwen asked Mark about other entertainment options at the ski lodge. "Right now, there's a dance party in the hall." "We didn't bring anything for dancing." "There's no dress code. You can come as you are." "So, no specific dress rules? Can we go too?" "Of course. I'll call one of my staff and they'll take you there." Mark made the call, and a few minutes later a young employee arrived to escort Alice and Gwen. After they left, Mark asked Hank about his wife. "Decided to get a divorce." "Why would you do that?" "Remember when I used to date her? There were rumors that she was seeing someone else." "Yeah, there were rumors, but nothing concrete. Well, this guy from out of town shows up, and he ends up becoming the commercial director at Judy's workplace. They started an emotional affair, which I didn't catch at first. He's got a wife, Kira, who's decided to divorce her husband and spilled the beans to me, and today, it all happened." "She cheated on you?" "No, they decided that for the long weekend we shouldn't vacation together, supposedly to strengthen our marriage as we age. I've always been skeptical of sociologists. Sociology is when people who don't understand society conduct research and then try to impose the supposed laws they've discovered, which are often just made up." "You're right about that. Sounds like they made them up for me." "So, what have you decided?" "When I talked to her, I realized that continuing our life would be unbearable, so I decided on a divorce." "What's next?" "Nothing. I need to figure out how to proceed. A group of lawyers is coming here tomorrow. They have an office downtown. I'll ask them for help. Come on, pour a drink." Alice and Gwen returned from the dance around 11 p.m. A ski center staff member had been attentive to Mark's guests and escorted the girls back to the lodge. Hank prepared a late supper for the girls, and they shared a meal together before heading to their rooms. Hank sat on his bed, struggling to hold back tears. It had been a challenging day for him, and he couldn't forget everything that Judy had done. He turned on the tape recorder and listened to the recording, reaffirming that his decision was the right one in the current circumstances. Judy had never waited for her husband, and she had no idea where he might have gone with their daughters. But Hank remembered that he had said promises should be kept, and they had promised their children a trip to the ski lodge, so that's where he had gone. And he suspected that reservations had been made in advance. She powered on the computer Hank typically used, but her extensive search yielded nothing. She couldn't find any information about ski lodges in the area he had been researching. The next morning, Hank woke up to a knock on his door. He called out, "Come in," and his daughters rushed into his room full of energy and excitement. "Daddy, wake up. Let's have breakfast and go skiing on the hill. Then we can go ice skating." "There's an ice skating rink here?" "Yes, there is." "And where do we have breakfast?" "At the cafe. Wash up and I'll be ready in 5 minutes." They headed to the cafe for breakfast. After changing into their skiing attire, they rented skis and took the ski lift up the mountain. They enjoyed skiing until lunchtime. In the afternoon, they returned to the cafe after changing. There, they ran into Mark and his wife. Mark mentioned that the company he had discussed had arrived, including a divorce specialist. "Meet me in my office today. I have a computer and printer, everything you need. I'll take your girls, my wife, and her sister to the ice rink tonight. If you don't mind, we'll meet at my place. The girls want to go dancing again. We'll join them. We'll dance and then return to our cabin. And don't forget, tomorrow is New Year's Eve. We need to prepare for the festivities." Everything was set. After lunch, Fyodor and Hank went to Mark's office. A lawyer soon arrived, and they discussed the situation. Maria explained the current legal landscape to Hank, which he was not very familiar with. She advised him against making rash decisions about their apartment, saying, "Keep in mind that your girls will grow up and have their own families. They will need their own space. If you move into the apartment with them now, there might be a new husband in the future, which could complicate matters." "But I can't imagine living in the same apartment as her." "Try to envision it and consider proposing a partition. First, explain to your wife that you'll be filing for divorce in court. When will the paperwork be ready? No rush. The courts have their holiday weekends too. I have my laptop with me. I'll prepare it and we can print it later. Additionally, you can reach out to me at my office or hire me to represent you in court. I like the last option." Hank and his daughters celebrated the new year with Mark, his wife, her sister, and a group of lawyers in the ski lodge's large hall. Other vacationers joined in, and it was a lively night filled with music, fun, and dancing. In the early hours of the morning, Hank returned to the cabin with his daughters, who were exhausted and ready for sleep. Hank rejoined the company, and after the main hall festivities ended, they gathered in his cabin. They sat around the fireplace and later retired to their respective cabins. The following days went as planned, with more skiing, ice skating, and dancing. In the evenings, Mark asked Hank, "How are you holding up?" Hank replied, "You know, apart from the daytime fun, there were nights when I shed a lot of tears. But today, I feel more prepared for what's ahead than ever." The day came when Hank and his daughters packed up for their return journey. Hank had a conversation with them, emphasizing the importance of not losing their apartment. They made a stop at the mall for groceries and returned home as darkness fell. Alice and Gwen immediately set about rearranging their rooms, with Gwen moving her things to Alice's room. At that moment, Judy entered and asked, "What are you two doing?" "We're turning Gwen's room into Dad's room, and we're sharing one room." Judy questioned this decision, and Gwen explained, "That's what Dad said." Judy remained dissatisfied and warned, "I won't tolerate any of your boyfriends in the house. You can hang out anywhere you want. Just so you know, I'm filing for divorce." With their room changes complete, the girls got ready for school. Hank started preparing dinner and breakfast for the morning. Judy walked in and tried to initiate a conversation, but Hank remained unresponsive. Judy then entered the girls' room and asked if they wanted to talk to her. The girls expressed that they hadn't missed her, and Hank instructed them to stay out of his way. For the rest of the week, Hank, Alice, and Gwen lived separately from Judy, with Hank locking the doors to the rooms they occupied. Hank cooked for himself and his daughters, deliberately ignoring Judy's presence. On Friday evening, a young woman delivered a registered letter with notice to Judy. It was a summons, and attached to it was a statement of claim. After reading the contents, Judy rushed into the kitchen in tears, asking Hank why he wanted a divorce and expressing her hope that things could work out. Hank advised her to consult with a lawyer and discuss the matter with him. Judy mentioned Richard's disappearance, and Hank suggested she reach out to him for advice. Judy insisted that she had no one, but Hank remained unmoved. The girls had already eaten and left for their room without a word to Judy. In her desperation, Judy continued to plead with Hank, declaring her love for him and their daughters. Hank replied, "What does my love have to do with it? I loved you, but that was until I found out you were cheating on me with your old boyfriend, someone you didn't even tell me about. I realized it was foolish to love you. You wanted to talk? Okay, go ahead. Tell me about your phony weekend. What did you plan to do? How are you going to spend it? It's been a while since I heard your marvelous sociological theories from your buddy. Enlighten me with your new stories. And how did you spend your weekend? Did you have fun? I thought it was great that your buddy disappeared once more. So, let's talk about it." Hank finished dinner and began gathering the dishes in the sink. Hearing the clatter of dishes, Alice came into the kitchen and offered to do the dishes. Hank refused her help and suggested she go upstairs to tidy her room. He assured her that he would do the dishes and take care of ironing her clothes, which were already dry. Judy, feeling entirely ignored during the conversation and sensing that Hank didn't want to engage with her, became emotional and went to her room. In the meantime, Hank promptly washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and headed to his room. He noticed a pile of laundry that he had washed during those days, waiting to be ironed. Before going to bed, Hank made his way to the kitchen, where he found Judy sitting in the darkness. Upon seeing him, she said, "Hank, none of this was planned. It just happened. I was seeing Richard at university and then he suddenly disappeared. No, I wasn't pursued or pressured into it. Very few people knew we were dating, and hardly anyone knew he broke up with me. Out of the blue, he appeared at our workplace. We began to interact due to work-related activities, and one day he asked me to have lunch. At first it was just lunch, nothing more. Then something changed. However, he made it clear from the start that there should be no suspicious encounters, and everything had to be carefully planned to avoid our spouses finding out. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a fling with no future. This temporary separation was meant to be our first and only date. So, is that why you concocted this story you told me? I didn't realize it would go this far, and I agreed to Richard's proposal. Hank, can't you see that he was just using you? Can you really be so naive? No, it's not that. It's been a while since you've complimented me on my looks, my clothes, or my modern hair. But don't put all of this on me. Just because I haven't been telling you every day how great you look doesn't justify having an affair. Are you saying you're willing to have an affair with anyone who gives you compliments? Over the next few days, Hank prepared for a meeting with child welfare officials. According to his lawyer Maria, their opinion would carry significant weight in court, although the children's views were also taken into consideration. Hank had a lot to handle in a short time, and at night, when he was alone, he found it hard to sleep. His thoughts were consumed by the themes of love and betrayal. The most important person in his life had betrayed him, leaving him with a mix of anger and pain. All he wanted now was a divorce, even though it seemed far from possible. He had lost trust in Judy, and their marriage was beyond repair. He also had to think about the children, who had distanced themselves from their mother. During a conversation, Judy argued that, for the sake of the children, they should stay married and try to make their marriage work. Hank's response was, "I believe our children need to know that their parents love them unconditionally. Our daughters are not responsible for what happened. They're old enough to form their own opinions about us, and you need to understand that I haven't spoken ill of you to them. They formed their judgments based on what they overheard when you were criticizing me about our temporary separation for a long weekend." Hank continued, "Judy, I'm proud of our kids. They quickly grasped what was happening between us and your lover. They discussed it among themselves, and I'm sure their decisions were not made lightly. When we left, they were extremely upset with you. Speaking with them changed my plans for the long weekend and the course of my life. The girls know more than you might think." Judy asked, "Do the girls hate me?" Hank replied, "For someone with a degree in sociology, you show surprising understanding. I didn't expect that. Yes, they know their mother was unfaithful, and yes, they are angry with you because of it. You can try to mend your relationship with them, of course. But, as a sociologist, you studied the field of psychology related to the study of human behavior patterns and activities. You should remember what adolescence is, occurring between the ages of 10, 11, and 15, 16. It's known as a transitional phase where children transition from childlike behavior to more adult-like behavior. They undergo significant physiological changes. It's hard to predict how you'll be able to connect with them. The time leading up to their court appearance was filled with pleas and appeals. Eventually, they faced each other in the courtroom for a preliminary session. They were given some time to try and reconcile their differences. When that period ended, Hank proposed that Judy sign a child custody agreement as part of their divorce. Under this agreement, the girls would live with him. After hearing everything, Judy declared, "I won't sign any agreement." Hank cautioned her, "Then I'll have to bring this matter before the court. The court will hear me, talk to the girls, and make a decision. It's unlikely to be in your favor." Judy responded, "You can't be so sure. Court decisions can be appealed." Hank concluded, "Well, good luck with that." Judy admitted, "Hank, I know I've been foolish. I realize what I was doing was wrong. Please understand, I love you, and I'll never have Richard in my life again. You've decided to replace him with someone else." Hank responded, "Well, that's your personal choice. It's your life. Don't try to blame me. You're a sociologist. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot on my plate. If you do decide to sign the agreement, it should be done in front of a notary. As a general rule, an agreement to determine child residence does not require mandatory notarization. This distinguishes it from alimony agreements, which hold the power of a court order. However, it is recommended to draft and notarize the document. Thanks, but she doesn't want to sign anything, and I don't need her to. It's just that she won't get anything." Consequently, the court's deadline for the parties to reconcile had expired. Judy made desperate attempts to reconcile with her daughters, but her efforts were unsuccessful. After school, the daughters started their computer science classes, returning home with their father. Following a light snack, usually in their father's room, they settled down to do their homework. Meanwhile, Hank prepared dinner and breakfast for the following morning. On one particular day, the child welfare authorities paid them a visit. They spoke with the girls, examined their room, and compiled a report. Subsequently, they attended the court hearing on time. Hank, accompanied by the girls, addressed some questions with their lawyer. Judy entered the courtroom, took her seat. She didn't have a lawyer, but had sought advice from counseling and divorced friends, fully understanding the irreparable state of her marriage. During the trial, she answered the court's questions briefly, with simple yes or no responses. At the end of the trial, Judy declared that she was relinquishing her share of the apartment in favor of her daughters, providing a deed of gift. The judge noted she had already taken her personal belongings from the apartment. What remained would be removed within a week, and she requested a court recess to sign the child support agreement proposed by Hank. After the recess, she added, "I am willing to voluntarily pay child support to Hank because I understand that the court's decision may not be in my favor." Hank responded, "To ensure transparency regarding the money I receive as child support, I propose the defendant open a separate account for each of her daughters and transfer the funds there. I believe they'll need that money when they come of age." The judge heard both parties and clarified that alimony and the division of the apartment weren't part of the initial claim, so the court wouldn't address them. As for the child support agreement and the divorce, these issues would be decided. The court recessed to make a decision. Eventually, Hank and Judy left the courthouse, officially divorced. The girls, who had been excused from the courtroom after their hearing, were found sitting on a bench near a bus stop, enjoying ice cream despite the cold. Seeing them, Hank inquired, "Girls, what are you doing? It's freezing outside." The girls explained they had brought the ice cream home and believed it was harmless to have in the winter and could even soothe a sore throat. There was a bit of paradox to it. Hank questioned why 19 was chosen as the age for them to access the money. The girls responded, "That's what we decided." Judy honored her promise and left the apartment. She moved in with her parents, where she cared for her ailing mother. Hank agreed to let her visit her daughters once a week, although Alice and Gwen were hesitant about it. On these visits, Judy spent time with her daughters at their residence. Epilogue. Hank spent a long time on his own. On New Year's Eve, he and his grown-up daughters vacationed at a ski resort, often in the company of Mark's wife's sister, Katya. They started to develop a relationship, but Hank wasn't in a rush to make any commitments. For him, the most important focus in life remained his daughters, whom he continued to nurture and guide. Katya didn't have any children of her own, but she got along well with Alice and Gwen. Although there was some initial jealousy on the part of the girls, Hank treated Judy respectfully, allowing her to visit their daughters and maintaining communication. However, they were no longer a couple or friends. Alice and Gwen matured without causing difficulties. Hank, who surrounded his daughters with love and care, saw the arrival of Katya as something that brought their family closer together. Judy experienced a challenging year. Her parents passed away one after the other. Hank helped her with the funerals, but their shared grief didn't mend their relationship. For a considerable time, Judy lived independently, with her daughters as her primary social circle. Eventually, she began dating a lonely widower from a neighboring house. Richard, her former partner, never reappeared in town. His whereabouts remained unknown, even to his ex-wife, Kira, who had remarried soon after their divorce.
When the company brought in the new boss, I had a feeling things might change, but I didn't expect things to get complicated this quickly. My wife and I worked for the same company, a decent-sized firm where everyone generally kept to themselves, and work was just that, work. Then, out of nowhere, they brought in this new guy as our boss. Apparently, my wife knew him from before. She mentioned that they'd gotten along well in the past, and now, if things went smoothly, it could make our lives easier. It didn't sit well with me from the start, but I kept my thoughts to myself. The last thing I wanted was to cause unnecessary tension at home over something that could turn out to be nothing. Soon enough, I noticed changes. The boss started keeping my wife late after hours. Not just once or twice, it became a regular thing. She'd come home later and later, and each time, she seemed to have some explanation for it. Just wrapping up, or he needed some extra help with a report. It wasn't the staying late that bothered me as much as the pattern. I couldn't ignore it. So one evening, I decided to confront her. I asked why it was always her that had to stay late. Why not anyone else? Why did this guy seem to rely on her so much more than he did anyone else in the office? She didn't get defensive, which I appreciated. She just said that maybe it had something to do with her getting a promotion soon. She explained that they were discussing possibilities, and her staying late might be a good sign. It meant she was being considered. She sounded genuinely excited about it, and I'll admit, I wanted to believe her. If it was true, a promotion would be good for us. Extra money, maybe less stress down the line. Still, something about it didn't feel right. I didn't say anything more at the time, just nodded and let her have her excitement. Days passed, and it kept happening. He'd keep her late, sometimes well past dinner time. I cooked for myself, ate alone, and watched the clock tick. She always had the same story, something about work, something about making an impression. I could tell she thought this was her shot at moving up in the company, and for a while, I tried to support her, even if my gut kept telling me otherwise. It didn't make sense to me why a new boss, who barely knew the team, would single her out this much. But I didn't want to come off as the jealous type, so I held back. Then, just like she said, the promotion came. One day, she walked through the door with this grin on her face, holding a bottle of wine she must have picked up on the way home. She told me they'd promoted her, better title, better pay, more opportunities. She looked genuinely happy, and I could see how much it meant to her. She said it was all thanks to the new boss giving her a chance to prove herself. I nodded, congratulated her, and we celebrated that night, just the two of us at the kitchen table. But deep down, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't about the promotion, I wanted her to succeed. It was about the way it happened, the circumstances around it. There was no denying that her boss had taken a special interest in her, and I wasn't sure why. She tried to reassure me, saying that everything was professional, that she was just putting in the work to get ahead. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was overthinking it. But part of me wondered if I was seeing the full picture. I decided not to push it any further, not right then. I didn't want to ruin what should have been a good moment for her. As the days went on, I tried to bury my doubts. She started coming home at regular hours again, and things almost went back to normal, at least on the surface. But every time she mentioned her boss, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. I watched her closely, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't trust him. Something about the way she spoke of him, about how he saw potential in her, it rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I figured I'd give it time and see if things settled down. After the promotion, my wife suggested we invite her boss and his wife over for a barbecue. She insisted it would be a good idea, a way to build connections and keep things smooth at work. I wasn't exactly thrilled about having this guy in my backyard, but I agreed. If this was important to her, I'd go along with it. Besides, maybe I'd get a better read on him in a more casual setting. We set a date for the weekend, and I spent most of that Saturday prepping the grill and getting everything ready. I wasn't about to half-ass this. If we were doing it, we were doing it right. The day of the barbecue, they showed up right on time. Her boss, Greg, was all smiles, acting like we were old friends, which I found a bit strange considering we barely knew each other. His wife, though, caught my attention immediately. She looked tired, not just a little worn out, but genuinely exhausted. Her smile seemed forced, and her eyes had that hollow look like she'd rather be anywhere else. I couldn't help but notice it. As we all sat down in the backyard, I made small talk, trying to get a feel for her. But Greg seemed to answer every question for her, cutting her off before she could say much of anything. She just nodded along, like she was used to it. At one point, while my wife and Greg were off talking about work, I took the opportunity to ask his wife if everything was all right. She gave me a quick smile, barely lifting her eyes, and before she could say a word, Greg was right there, jumping in with an answer. He said she'd just been feeling a bit under the weather lately, nothing serious. She nodded, not saying anything, just looking down at her plate. It was odd, the way he controlled the conversation, the way she seemed to fade into the background. I didn't push it any further, but it stuck with me. Something about the way she looked and acted just didn't sit right. The rest of the barbecue went off without any major issues. We ate, drank, and made small talk. My wife seemed to enjoy herself, laughing and chatting with Greg like they were old friends. I played along, but my attention kept drifting back to his wife. She hardly spoke, and when she did, it was only when Greg wasn't around. She seemed nervous, like she was walking on eggshells. It wasn't my place to pry, but I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on there. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Later that night, after everyone had left and we were cleaning up, I brought it up to my wife. I told her what I'd noticed, how Greg's wife seemed off, how she barely spoke unless he was out of earshot. My wife just shrugged it off, saying that maybe she was just tired. She reminded me that Greg's wife had mentioned not feeling well, and maybe that was all there was to it. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. It wasn't just tiredness, it was something deeper, something that made me uneasy. My wife told me not to worry about it, that it wasn't our business, and maybe she was right. But the image of Greg's wife, sitting there with that empty look in her eyes, stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the way Greg controlled every aspect of their conversation, the way his wife seemed to shrink in his presence, it all felt off. I decided to let it go for the moment, but I made a mental note to keep an eye on things. Over the next few days, I tried to put it out of my mind, but it kept creeping back in. I couldn't help but replay the barbecue in my head, the way Greg's wife barely spoke, the way she seemed to disappear into herself whenever he was around. My wife seemed content to move on, but I wasn't so sure. I wasn't about to start accusing anyone of anything without proof, but I knew I'd be watching more closely from now on. Maybe my wife was right, and it was nothing more than exhaustion or a rough patch. But I'd seen enough to know that sometimes, things aren't always what they seem. I wasn't going to ignore my gut just because it was easier that way. If there was something going on, I'd find out eventually. For now, I'd keep my eyes open and wait for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. A while after the barbecue, I started noticing something different. My wife was bringing home a lot more money. It wasn't just a small raise, it was significant. I didn't ask about it at first, thinking maybe it was just part of her recent promotion. But as the weeks went on, it became clear that this was more than just a regular pay bump. One evening, as we were having dinner, she casually mentioned that she'd been promoted again. This time, it wasn't just a title change, it came with a hefty salary increase. She seemed proud, and I could see why. But something about it felt off to me, like it was happening too fast. She didn't stop there. She told me to be ready because she was working on something else involving me. That caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting anything to change in my career, and I wasn't sure what she meant. She said she'd been talking to her boss about opportunities for me as well, that they were almost finalized. I nodded, but it made me uneasy. I wasn't sure how I felt about my career being discussed without me, especially with someone like Greg. I didn't want to seem ungrateful, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being pushed into something I hadn't asked for. It wasn't long before her colleagues started reaching out to me. Some sent messages, others even called. They were congratulating me, saying how great it was that things were moving forward for both of us. They spoke as if it was all a done deal, as if they knew more about what was happening in my life than I did. It made me uncomfortable. I wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this, and I definitely wasn't used to people assuming I was on board with something I hadn't even agreed to yet. I thanked them, tried to be polite, but inside, I felt like I was losing control of the situation. My wife, on the other hand, seemed thrilled. She talked about how everything was finally coming together for us, how this was the break we'd been waiting for. She spoke about Greg as if he was some kind of savior, the guy who was making all our dreams come true. I tried to share in her excitement, but it wasn't easy. I didn't trust Greg, and I wasn't sure I wanted anything from him. The more she talked about him, the more I felt like he was trying to insert himself into our lives in a way that made me uneasy. It was one thing for my wife to get a promotion, but it was another for him to be pulling strings for me without my consent. One night, after another congratulatory call from one of her co-workers, I decided to bring it up. I asked my wife why everyone seemed so certain about my future when I hadn't even been told the details. She brushed it off, saying that it was all part of the plan, that she wanted to surprise me. She said that Greg had connections and that he was willing to help me get ahead, just like he had helped her. I didn't like the sound of it. I told her I wasn't comfortable with surprises when it came to my career. I wanted to know exactly what was going on before any decisions were made. She looked a little hurt, like she didn't understand why I wasn't more grateful. She said she was just trying to help, that this was a good thing for us. I didn't want to argue, so I let it drop. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were moving too fast, that I was being pulled along without a say. I appreciated that she wanted the best for us, but I needed to feel like I had some control over my own life. I wasn't about to let someone like Greg decide my future for me, no matter how much he had supposedly done for my wife. The next few days were tense. My wife kept talking about the opportunities coming our way, about how we needed to be ready for the changes. I tried to stay supportive, but it was hard. Every time she mentioned Greg, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was manipulating things, that he had his own agenda. My wife seemed blind to it, caught up in the excitement of her promotions and the money coming in. I didn't want to burst her bubble, but I couldn't ignore my instincts. As more messages and calls came in from her co-workers, I started to feel like I was being backed into a corner. Everyone seemed to know what was happening except for me. They all talked as if this was the natural next step, as if it was only right that I should be getting a boost thanks to Greg's influence. But I didn't want to owe anything to Greg. I didn't trust the guy, and I wasn't comfortable with the idea of him having any say over my career. I knew I had to find a way to take back control, to make sure that whatever happened next was on my terms, not his. The time came for another get-together, this time at Greg's place. My wife was excited, as always, eager to keep up the connection. I wasn't particularly looking forward to it, but I knew it was important to her, so I went along with it. We arrived at their house, and I immediately noticed that Greg's wife, Karen, looked even more worn out than the last time I saw her. She was polite, smiled when she needed to, but there was something in her eyes, a sadness that seemed to run deep. It wasn't just tiredness, it was something more, and it bothered me. As the evening went on, we all made small talk, the usual pleasantries that come with these kinds of gatherings. Greg was his usual charming self, always in control of the conversation, always the one steering things where he wanted them to go. My wife seemed perfectly at ease, laughing at his jokes, engaging in discussions about work and future plans. I tried to play along, but my attention kept drifting to Karen. She barely spoke, and when she did, her voice was soft, almost hesitant, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. At one point, my wife excused herself to go to the bathroom, leaving me alone with Greg and Karen. Greg got up to grab something from the kitchen, and I saw my chance. I leaned in a bit closer to Karen and asked her if everything was all right. I kept my voice low, not wanting to draw attention. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe, or resignation. She shook her head slightly and whispered that this wasn't the place to talk about it. Before I could say anything else, Greg was back, and the moment was gone. Greg must have noticed that I'd been talking to Karen, because he came over and put a hand on my shoulder, guiding me away from her and towards the other side of the room. He smiled, but there was something in his eyes that felt more like a warning than anything else. He told me that Karen had been feeling under the weather lately, that there was nothing to worry about. He said it in that smooth, confident way of his, like he was used to people taking his word without question. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. There was more to it, I was sure of that, but I wasn't about to push it right then and there. After that, Greg shifted the conversation to me. He mentioned that there were opportunities coming up at work, something that might interest me. He said it in a way that made it clear he wasn't just making small talk. He looked me in the eye and said that soon I'd have a chance to receive an offer that would be hard to refuse. I didn't like the way he said it, like he already knew what my answer would be. I forced a smile and told him I'd think about it, but inside, I felt a mix of anger and unease. I didn't like being cornered, and I definitely didn't like the idea of Greg trying to pull me into whatever he had planned. The rest of the evening went by in a blur. My wife came back, and the conversation shifted back to lighter topics, work, upcoming projects, plans for the future. I tried to stay engaged, but my mind kept drifting back to Karen and what she'd said, or rather, what she hadn't said. There was something going on, something that Greg was keeping under wraps, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before it all came to the surface. My wife seemed oblivious, caught up in the excitement of the evening, and I didn't want to spoil it for her, so I kept my thoughts to myself. As we left Greg's house that night, my wife was all smiles, talking about how well the evening had gone and how great it was that Greg was looking out for me. I nodded along, not wanting to dampen her mood, but inside, I felt a growing sense of unease. Greg wasn't just looking out for me, he was trying to control the situation, trying to pull me into something I didn't fully understand. And Karen, there was something wrong there, something that Greg was hiding. I knew I couldn't ignore it, not if I wanted to protect myself and my wife from whatever was coming. Over the next few days, I kept replaying the evening in my head. The way Karen looked at me, the way Greg stepped in before she could say too much, the way he talked about the opportunity coming my way, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. I knew I needed to be careful, to keep my eyes open and not let myself get pulled in without understanding what was really going on. Greg was playing a game, and I wasn't about to let myself be a pawn in it. Not long after the evening at Greg's house, I noticed something else that caught my attention. One evening, while I was using our shared computer, I stumbled upon some strange search queries in the browser history. They were related to large bedroom toys, the kind of thing that definitely wasn't part of our usual conversations. It struck me as odd, and I couldn't just let it go without saying something. It wasn't the kind of thing I could ignore. So later that night, I decided to bring it up with my wife. I asked her about it directly. I didn't accuse her of anything, didn't raise my voice, I just wanted to know what was going on. She looked at me for a moment, then laughed, like it was no big deal. She said it was just a joke between her and one of her friends. Apparently, her friend had been joking around, and they'd looked it up together. She said her friend was in an open relationship and had been talking about all sorts of things, and it had come up as part of their conversation. She made it sound like it was just harmless curiosity, nothing more. I took her at her word. She seemed calm, and I didn't see any reason to doubt her. She explained that her friend was just messing around and that they were having a light-hearted conversation. It didn't seem like anything worth making a fuss over. I told her that I wasn't particularly interested in those kinds of topics, but if it was just a joke, then fine. She nodded and reassured me that it was nothing serious. I let it go at that, not wanting to blow things out of proportion. She also mentioned that her friend had asked her opinion on open relationships, and they got to talking about different things. I made my stance clear, I wasn't interested in that kind of lifestyle, and I believed that marriage was meant for two people, nothing more. She understood and didn't argue. She said it was simply an interesting discussion and nothing more than that. She seemed genuinely fine with my response, and we moved on from the topic without any tension. From that point on, I decided not to dwell on it. My wife had given me an explanation, and it made sense. People have all kinds of conversations, and sometimes they look things up just out of curiosity. There was no point in reading too much into it. We had a good marriage, and I trusted her. I wasn't going to let something small turn into an issue when there wasn't any real reason for it. The next few days went on as usual. My wife acted like everything was normal, like our conversation hadn't been anything significant. She went about her routine, smiling, talking about work, making plans for the weekend. I did the same. Life was busy, and we had enough on our plates without me worrying about something that was already settled. If she said it was just a joke, I believed her. There was no need to make things more complicated than they needed to be. I knew that the best way forward was to keep focusing on what mattered, our life together, our plans, and our future. There was no point in letting small doubts creep in where they didn't belong. We had worked hard to build a good life, and I wasn't going to let anything disrupt that. My wife had always been straightforward with me, and I had no reason to think otherwise now. The next evening, after dinner, my wife approached me with an idea. She suggested that we should spice things up and have some fun. At first, I wasn't quite sure what she meant, but then she mentioned inviting Greg over. That threw me off. I couldn't understand why she'd want to bring her boss into something that should have been just between us. I asked her what she meant, and she started to explain, her tone casual, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Not long after, Greg arrived. He walked in like he owned the place, all smiles and charm, but there was something unsettling about it. My wife seemed relaxed, almost excited, which only added to my confusion. Then they both sat down, and Greg began to speak. He mentioned the opportunities at work again, the ones he had hinted at before. But this time, he didn't stop there. He started talking about fantasies, about ways we could all benefit if I was willing to participate. It took me a moment to realize what he was implying, but once it clicked, I felt a surge of anger. Greg and my wife were suggesting that I become a part of their sexual fantasies, offering me a good position at work and a significant salary increase in return. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, the person I trusted more than anyone, was sitting there, nodding along as if this was a perfectly reasonable proposition. The more Greg talked, the angrier I became. He spoke like he was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful for the opportunity. It was sickening. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. I couldn't listen to another word of it. I demanded that they both leave. I told Greg that he had no right to come into my home and make such disgusting suggestions. I looked at my wife, and I could see the shock on her face. Maybe she hadn't expected me to react this way. But I didn't care. This was beyond anything I could tolerate, and I wasn't about to let it continue for another second. Greg tried to calm me down, saying that I was overreacting, that we should all just sit down and talk it through. But I wasn't interested in talking. I wanted him out of my house, and I made that very clear. I wasn't about to let someone like him manipulate me or my wife. I didn't care what kind of opportunities he was offering. No job, no amount of money, was worth compromising my dignity. I told him to leave, and I meant it. My wife tried to say something, to explain or justify what was happening, but I cut her off. There was nothing she could say that would make this okay. The fact that she had even entertained the idea was enough to make me question everything. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious all at once. I wasn't going to stand there and listen to excuses. I wanted them both gone, and I wasn't going to ask again. Greg finally got the message. He stood up, still trying to maintain that smug smile, but I could see the tension in his eyes. He said something about reconsidering, about how this could be a missed opportunity, but I didn't care. I watched as he walked out the door, my wife following behind him, still trying to say something to me. I didn't want to hear it. I closed the door behind them, locking it, and stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. That night, I sat alone in the living room, my mind racing. I couldn't believe how far things had gone, how twisted everything had become. The betrayal cut deep, but more than that, I felt a sense of resolve. I wasn't going to let anyone, not Greg, not even my wife, dictate my life or push me into something I didn't want. I knew that from this point on, things were going to change. There was no going back to the way things were before, and I was ready to face whatever came next. After Greg and my wife left, I was done with the confusion and guessing games. I knew what had happened. My wife had betrayed me, and Greg was behind all of it. There was nothing left to figure out. I wasn't interested in understanding Greg's twisted motives or my wife's excuses. I wanted one thing, to make sure Karen, Greg's wife, knew exactly what kind of man she was married to. I picked up my phone and called Karen. She answered after a few rings, her voice hesitant. I wasted no time getting to the point. I told her what had just happened, that Greg had come into my home and tried to pull me into some sick game, offering me a promotion in exchange for becoming part of their twisted fantasies. I made it clear that my wife had been in on it, that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. There was a long silence on the other end before she finally spoke. Karen's voice was shaky, but she didn't sound surprised. She admitted that she already knew about Greg's behavior. She said she had known for a long time what kind of man he was. She told me that she was in a similar situation herself, that Greg had been forcing her into things she didn't want to do for years. She said that he cheated on her regularly and that he was abusive, both physically and emotionally. She stayed because she felt she had no choice. He controlled the money, the house, everything. Hearing her say that made my anger burn even hotter. I wasn't just angry for myself anymore, I was angry for her too. Greg was a monster, and he had been getting away with it for far too long. I told her that she didn't deserve any of this, that no one did. She sounded defeated, like she had accepted her fate, but I wasn't about to let that slide. I told her that she needed to get out, that she couldn't keep living like this. She hesitated, then said that it wasn't that simple. Greg had too much control, too many connections. If she tried to leave, he would ruin her. I could hear the fear in her voice, and I understood it. But I wasn't going to let Greg win. I told her that I was willing to help, that she didn't have to do this alone. She thanked me, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She had been living in fear for so long that she couldn't see a way out. It was frustrating, but I knew I couldn't push her too hard. She had to make the decision for herself, and all I could do was offer my support. Before we ended the call, Karen told me that she was sorry for what had happened, that she wished she could have warned me sooner. I told her it wasn't her fault. The blame lay squarely on Greg and my wife. I thanked her for being honest with me, and I promised her that if she ever needed anything, I would be there to help. She sounded grateful, but I could still hear the resignation in her voice. It was clear that she didn't believe things could change. After I hung up, I sat there for a while, my anger still simmering. Greg had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let it go. He had not only destroyed my marriage, but he had also been abusing his own wife for years. I knew I had to do something, not just for myself, but for Karen as well. I wasn't interested in playing detective or trying to piece together the truth anymore. I had all the information I needed. Greg was a manipulative, abusive bastard, and it was time someone stood up to him. After my conversation with Karen, I knew it was time to take action. Words were no longer enough, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Greg to make his next move. I needed evidence, something concrete that could show exactly what kind of man he was. I decided to get a recording device and a camera. If Greg thought he could walk all over people without consequences, he was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't going to let him get away with it, not anymore. I went to an electronics store the next day and bought a small recording device and a discreet camera. I wanted something that could capture everything without being noticed. I wasn't sure what my next encounter with Greg would look like, but I knew I needed to be prepared. I wasn't going to let myself be caught off guard again. I wanted proof, something undeniable, that I could use to expose him, both to the authorities and to anyone else who needed to know the truth. When I got home, I took my time setting everything up. The camera was small enough to hide in the closet, positioned so that it would have a clear view of the living room. It was the perfect spot, out of sight, but able to capture everything that happened. I tested it a few times to make sure it worked, adjusting the angle until I was satisfied. I needed this to be done right. There couldn't be any mistakes. Next, I hid the recording device. It was tiny, easy to conceal. I decided to tape it under the table in the living room, where any conversation would be clearly picked up. I tested it as well, speaking at different volumes to make sure it would catch every word. The quality was good, and I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that I was ready. If Greg or my wife tried anything again, I'd have the evidence I needed to prove what they were up to. But I wasn't naive. I knew that things could still go wrong. Greg was unpredictable, and there was no telling how he might react if he realized what I was doing. I needed to be ready for anything, including the possibility that things could get violent. So I took one more precaution. I took a kitchen knife and taped it to the bottom of one of the chairs in the living room. It wasn't something I wanted to use, but if it came down to it, I wasn't going to let myself be a victim. I had to be ready for whatever might happen. Once everything was set, I took a step back and looked around the living room. It looked the same as always, nothing out of place, nothing to give away what I had done. I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in days. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had some control. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was taking action. I was ready for whatever came next, and I wasn't going to back down. That night, I went over everything in my head, making sure I hadn't missed anything. I knew there was no guarantee that Greg would come back, or that my wife would try to pull something again. But if they did, I'd be ready. I wasn't going to let them catch me off guard, not this time. I was done being the one who was always a step behind, always trying to figure out what was happening. Now, I was the one setting the trap. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let Greg or anyone else take advantage of me again. I had the camera, the recorder, and the knife. I was ready for whatever came next, and I wasn't afraid. If they wanted to test me, they'd find out soon enough that I wasn't the kind of man who backed down. Not anymore. I knew it was time to put my plan into action. I picked up the phone and called my wife, telling her that I was ready. There was a moment of silence before she agreed, saying that she and Greg would be over soon. I hung up and took a deep breath. I had everything set up: the camera, the recorder, and even the knife under the chair. I wasn't going to back down, and I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. This was it. It was time to get the evidence I needed. It wasn't long before I heard the knock at the door. I opened it to see my wife standing there, Greg right behind her, looking as smug as ever. They walked in, and Greg wasted no time getting to the point. He asked if I had finally come around, if I was ready to take the offer he'd made. I looked him in the eye and asked him what exactly I would get in return for my agreement. He smiled, that same arrogant smile, and repeated his proposal, a higher position at work, more money, and all the benefits that came with it. All I had to do was go along with what they wanted. I nodded, pretending to consider it. I could see the satisfaction on Greg's face, like he thought he had won. I agreed, telling them that I was willing to do what they wanted. My wife looked relieved, and she disappeared into the other room for a moment. When she came back, she was holding an oversized toy, the kind that I had seen in those strange search queries. I kept my expression neutral, watching as she handed it to Greg. They both looked at me, waiting for a reaction, but I stayed calm. I needed them to think I was on board with this. Greg and my wife wasted no time. They started right there in front of me, acting like I was just a bystander, like my presence didn't matter. I clenched my jaw, my eyes fixed on them, but I stayed still. I needed to wait, to let the camera and recorder capture everything. I needed enough evidence to make sure there was no denying what they were doing. The anger inside me was building, but I kept it in check. I couldn't afford to lose control, not yet. As the minutes passed, I could feel my patience wearing thin. They were so caught up in themselves that they didn't even notice me watching. They thought they had me beaten, that I was just going to sit there and let them humiliate me. But they were wrong. I had waited long enough. I stood up, and they barely even noticed. I walked over to where Greg had put the toy, my hand shaking with anger. I grabbed it, and without warning, I swung it at him. The first hit caught Greg completely off guard. He stumbled, a look of shock on his face. My wife screamed, but I didn't stop. I kept swinging, the anger that I had held back for so long finally unleashed. Greg tried to defend himself, but he was too stunned to react. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, not after everything he had done, not after everything he had tried to take from me. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't someone he could control, that I wasn't going to be his pawn. My wife tried to pull me back, screaming at me to stop, but I barely heard her. All I could see was Greg, the man who had tried to ruin my life, who had manipulated my wife, who had treated us both like we were nothing. I didn't stop until I saw the fear in his eyes, until I knew that he understood that this was over. I threw the toy to the side, my breathing heavy, and looked down at him. He was on the floor, gasping, his arrogance completely gone. I stepped back, my wife still screaming, tears streaming down her face. I didn't care. I had done what I needed to do. I had taken back control. I looked at Greg one last time and told him to get out of my house. He struggled to his feet, stumbling towards the door. My wife followed him, still crying, but I didn't stop them. I watched as they left, slamming the door behind them. The room was quiet now, and I felt a sense of finality. It was over. They thought they could break me, but they were wrong. I wasn't broken, not by a long shot. After Greg and my wife left the house, I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle in. The anger was still there, but it had cooled into a steady resolve. There was no going back now, and I didn't want to. My marriage was over, and it was time to make that clear. I walked through the house, gathering all of my wife's belongings, her clothes, her personal items, anything that belonged to her. I wasn't going to let any trace of her stay in my home. I grabbed some trash bags and started packing her things, not caring about keeping them neat or organized. As I worked, I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Once I had everything packed up, I took the bags out to the curb and left them there. I went back inside, locked the door, and took a deep breath. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. When my wife eventually tried to come back, she found her things on the curb and the locks changed. She pounded on the door, shouting, demanding that I let her in, but I ignored her. I told her through the closed door that I was done, that I wanted a divorce. There was nothing left to discuss. She tried to argue, tried to plead, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I had made up my mind, and there was no changing it. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and there was no forgiveness for that. After she finally left, I turned my attention to the evidence I had gathered. The camera and the recorder had captured everything that had happened, every disgusting detail of Greg's proposition and their actions. I knew what I had to do. I took the footage and brought it to the police. I explained everything: Greg's manipulation, his abuse of power, the way he had tried to use his position to coerce me and my wife. The officers listened, and I could see the seriousness in their faces as they watched the footage. There was no denying what Greg had done. It didn't take long for the consequences to come down. Greg was fired from his position, his career in ruins. My wife, too, was let go. She had been complicit in everything, and there was no way she could stay at the company after what had happened. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction knowing that they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. They had thought they could do whatever they wanted without repercussions, but they had been wrong. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. In the days that followed, I found myself thinking about Karen, Greg's wife. She had been through so much, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. I decided to reach out to her, to see if there was anything I could do to help. When I called her, she sounded surprised, but also relieved. We met for coffee, and she opened up to me about everything she had endured. It was heartbreaking to hear, but I was glad she finally had someone she could talk to, someone who understood. I made it clear to Karen that she didn't have to go through this alone anymore. I offered to help her in any way I could, whether it was finding a place to stay, getting legal advice, or just being there to listen. She had been isolated for so long, and I wanted her to know that she had support now. As we talked, I could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a hint of strength that had been buried under years of fear and control. It felt good to be able to do something positive after everything that had happened. Over time, Karen and I grew closer. It wasn't romantic, not yet, at least, but there was a genuine connection between us. We had both been hurt by the same man, both been betrayed by people we should have been able to trust. We understood each other's pain in a way that no one else could. Helping her gave me a sense of purpose, a way to move forward from the wreckage of my marriage. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. It had been a while since I had last seen either Greg or my wife, and I had hoped that it would stay that way. But one evening, there was a loud, insistent knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I looked out the window, I saw them, Greg and my wife, standing on my porch, both of them looking angry. My heart began to race, and I knew that this wasn't going to be a peaceful conversation. They had come looking for trouble, and I wasn't about to let them intimidate me in my own home. I grabbed the gun I had bought for protection, something I had hoped I would never need to use, and approached the door. I opened it just enough to see them, but kept the gun hidden behind my back. Greg started yelling immediately, demanding to know why I had gone to the police, why I had tried to ruin his life. My wife stood beside him, her arms crossed, looking just as furious. They both thought they could come here and bully me into backing down, but they were wrong. I stepped back and told them both to leave. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in hearing anything they had to say, and that if they didn't leave, there would be consequences. Greg's face turned red with anger, and he stepped forward, shoving the door open. He yelled that he wasn't going anywhere until he got what he wanted, that I was going to pay for what I had done. I could see the rage in his eyes, and I knew that things were about to escalate. Without hesitation, I pulled out the gun and pointed it at him. I told him to back off, that this was his last warning. My wife gasped, her eyes wide with fear, but Greg wasn't backing down. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for the gun, his face twisted in anger. In that split second, I knew I had no choice. I pulled the trigger, and the gun went off. The sound was deafening, and Greg stumbled backward, clutching his leg as he fell to the ground. My wife screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood was seeping through his pants, and he was writhing in pain, cursing at me. I kept the gun pointed at them, my hands shaking, but I didn't lower it. I told my wife to call an ambulance, and she fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling. I could hear her sobbing as she spoke to the operator, but I kept my focus on Greg. He had tried to attack me in my own home, and I wasn't going to let my guard down until the police arrived. It didn't take long for the sirens to echo down the street. The police arrived, their lights flashing, and I put the gun down, raising my hands to show that I wasn't a threat. They rushed in, quickly assessing the situation. One officer handcuffed Greg, while another spoke to me, asking what had happened. I explained everything, how Greg had forced his way into my home, how he had attacked me, and how I had fired in self-defense. My wife was still crying, but she didn't deny what had happened. They took Greg away in an ambulance, and I was taken down to the station for questioning. I told them everything, and they listened carefully. I was honest about what had happened, and after reviewing the evidence, they decided that I had acted in self-defense. It was a relief, but the whole ordeal had left me shaken. Greg had tried to control me, to intimidate me, but in the end, he had only hurt himself. He was charged with breaking and entering an assault, and they locked him up. In the days that followed, I tried to come to terms with everything that had happened. It wasn't easy, but I knew that I had done what I had to do. Greg and my wife had made their choices, and they had paid the price for them. I wasn't proud of what I had done, but I knew that it had been necessary. I had protected myself, and I had stood my ground. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of closure. The nightmare that Greg had brought into my life was finally over, and I was ready to move on. Time passed after the incident with Greg, and life slowly began to settle into a new normal. I focused on rebuilding, on putting the pieces of my life back together after everything that had happened. I hadn't heard from my wife since that night, and I was grateful for the silence. I needed time to heal, to move forward without the constant reminders of betrayal. But one day, out of the blue, there she was, standing at my doorstep, her eyes filled with tears. She looked different, more vulnerable, more desperate. She asked if we could talk, and I could see that she had been crying even before she arrived. I didn't want to let her in, didn't want to hear what she had to say, but there was a part of me that needed closure. So I stepped aside and let her in, closing the door behind her. She stood there, wringing her hands, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for something familiar. She started talking, her voice trembling. She apologized for everything, for betraying me, for lying, for letting Greg manipulate her. She said that she had made a terrible mistake, that she regretted everything she had done, and that she wanted to come back. She begged me to give her another chance, to forget everything that had happened and start over. She promised that things would be different, that she would never hurt me again. Her words were full of desperation, and I could see that she meant them. But it was too late. I listened to her, letting her say everything she needed to say. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret, the fear of losing everything. But as I stood there, I realized that I felt nothing for her anymore. The love that had once been there had been shattered by her betrayal, and there was no putting it back together. I told her that. I told her that what she had done was unforgivable, that there was no going back. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. She started crying, begging me to reconsider. She said that she couldn't imagine her life without me, that she had realized how much she loved me and how wrong she had been. But her words fell flat. I had heard enough lies, enough promises that meant nothing. I wasn't about to let myself be pulled back into the mess that she had created. I had moved on, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the past. I told her that it was over, that I had no interest in trying to fix something that was beyond repair. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she couldn't understand how I could be so cold. But it wasn't about being cold, it was about protecting myself, about making sure I never went through that kind of pain again. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away. There was no coming back from that. She stood there for a moment, as if hoping I might change my mind. But I didn't. I turned away from her, making it clear that the conversation was over. She sobbed, pleading one last time, but I didn't respond. Eventually, she left, her footsteps echoing down the hallway as she walked away. I closed the door behind her, locking it, and felt a sense of finality. It was truly over, and I was ready to move on. In the days that followed, I felt a strange sense of peace. My wife had tried to come back, but I had stood my ground. I had chosen myself, my own well-being, over the toxic relationship that she had tried to resurrect. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. I knew that I deserved better, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less. The past was behind me, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future had in store.
I'm not the type of person who wants to see everything fall apart and burn. When I noticed something was wrong with my wife, I didn't hesitate to talk to her about it. I asked her why she had stopped talking to me, hugging me, and being close to me. I even asked her why she seemed uncomfortable with my touch. It wasn't easy to get her to open up at first, but eventually she did. And what I heard broke my heart. She said she didn't feel like I was enough for her, that she had to do everything herself and couldn't rely on me. She felt like she had to make all the decisions and handle everything, including the kids. She even said that maybe she would be better off alone. Hearing all of this was a shock, but I didn't want to fight with her. I love her so much that I accepted what she said and told her I understood her pain. I promised her I would work on my behavior so she wouldn't have to stress about it. I just want to make things right because she means the world to me, but it's tough, you know? Despite all that, I do. I still have my own thoughts that keep me awake at night. That's actually why I ended up seeking support from this group, because the accusations my wife is making against me just aren't true, at least not from my perspective. I genuinely believe I'm a good husband who meets the norm. I work around 8 or 9 hours from home, and when I'm finished, I dedicate myself to taking care of my boys. I play with them, feed them, take the older one to swim lessons, and tuck them in at bedtime. I'll even wake up in the middle of that night if they need me. And it's not just about the kids. I also handle household chores, the dishes, groceries, and some cleaning. Although my wife thinks I'm not efficient enough at it, so she prefers to take over. I also take care of the car and other responsibilities related to our new house. I do all of this to make her life easier because I know how challenging it can be with 2 little boys. But the thing is, I'm not always the type of person who's constantly proactive. You know, there are those people who can't sit on the couch for 5 minutes without thinking about what to do next, what needs fixing, what business to start, what chores are left to do. My father-in-law is like that, but I'm not. I have my own unique way of doing things, and I believe that's okay too. At the end of the day, when the kids are finally asleep, work is checked off, and the house is in order, I look forward to unwinding with a movie or some video games. I've never been the entrepreneurial type who wants to start my own business. I thrive when I'm given tasks to excel at in my field. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Plenty of people are like me. I'm not chasing some flashy career or dreaming of swimming in money. I'm just an ordinary guy. But things have been different lately. I've noticed my wife having issues with my approach, even though we've had 9 years of blissful marriage. It all came to a head in December, and since then I've been pushing myself to go against my natural personality. I've been doing extra groceries, fixing up things around the house, barely taking a moment to rest in the evenings. I thought she'd appreciate it, but her attitude towards me remained unchanged. So I mustered up the courage to confront her. My emotions running high, I looked her straight in the eye and asked her point blank, "Do you even want to save our marriage?" Her response hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know, I couldn't believe it. Was she that clueless or just indifferent? I gritted my teeth and pushed on, asking her if she was willing to go to marriage counseling. And once again, she had the audacity to reply with that same infuriating answer. I don't know. I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped at her, telling her that this was not the time for indecision. Our kids could end up with divorced parents if we didn't act fast, and her lack of commitment was unacceptable. She finally agreed to go to therapy after much prodding, but true to form, she showed no interest in taking any initiative. I had to do all the legwork in finding a therapist myself. And during one of our counseling sessions, she dropped some brutal truths that cut me to the core. She said she only married me to impress her family and fit into their idea of a perfect, happy family with beautiful children. She admitted that she was never truly in love with me but was merely enchanted by the idea of marriage. As if that wasn't enough, I later found out that she had met with her fellow priest to discuss our marriage behind my back. It was a betrayal that left me reeling with anger and hurt. But despite it all, I soldiered on and found a good therapist for us. We're now approaching our 3rd session, but it's been a rocky road. We learned that we have different love languages. I crave touch, while she prioritizes getting things done. It's been a constant struggle, and to make matters worse, she hasn't shown me any physical affection since we started counseling. No hugs, no touch, nothing. The therapist was taken aback when she heard that my wife and I hadn't slept in the same room for 6 whole months. My wife tried to explain it away, saying that she's been sharing the bed with the kids and there's simply no space for me. But the therapist didn't hold back. She bluntly told my wife that it's a terrible example to set for the kids, denying their own father access to the bedroom. She even suggested that we should go to IKEA and buy a single bed to put next to the big one. So I went ahead and did just that. I bought the bed, assembled it, and now I sleep there. But I still feel just as alone as before. My wife is all the way to the left, the boys are in the middle, and I'm stuck on the far right, feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. From the very beginning of this issue, my wife has been changing her story. Now she's saying that she's depressed from being stuck at home with the kids all the time. She's claiming that she said all those hurtful things because she was just too emotional. But I would never dream of saying anything like that to her, no matter how upset I am. So my wife went back to work, and we had to hire a nanny to handle the kids. The only change I noticed is that we started talking more. But I ain't just her buddy, I'm her husband too. And there's zero closeness between us. And it ain't looking like it's going to improve anytime soon. No signs of it. She doesn't give a duck about our marriage counseling sessions. I'm the one who has to keep setting them up. Things are much worse than I thought. My buddies were saying, "Dude, your wife is totally cheating on you." And at first, I thought it was like some sci-fi movie stuff. I didn't believe my wife would do that. But today, everything changed. I caught her red-handed by installing a voice-activated recorder in our car for just 3 days. She used the car to go to work and the gym, and bam, she called him or he called her twice. I heard every word of their video conversation on the phone and got all the evidence I need. They were talking about personal stuff, like when my wife and I first met 9 years ago. You know, all that attraction, inside jokes and stuff. I haven't felt that with her in a long time. Believe it or not, they were planning a vacation together and she wants to visit him in July, giving him 2 years to move back to our country. I can't wrap my head around it. They were even discussing closeness details, and she straight up said she's leaving me to be with him. They were talking about their favorite positions, so you know they were real close. I listened to an hour-long recording of it all. I need to process it, and I'm meeting with an attorney next week. Thanks to my friend's suggestion, I wouldn't have bought that voice recording device if it wasn't for him. Someone might call me a moron for placing it in the car, but I don't care. I don't feel guilty. I can't stop thinking about my kids and what she's done. They've been up to something since last September, and it took me 2 months to notice changes in her behavior. Next week, I'll be taking care of my old father in another city for the entire week, so she'll use my home office. She'll probably be talking to him in my office. Should I place the recorder there for the next week, or do I have enough evidence already? Out of the blue, my wife tried calling her ex-boyfriend 4 times in a row at 10 p.m. I found out through an app that saved our numbers, showing all incoming and outgoing calls. Why would my wife, who never mentioned her ex before, suddenly be calling him persistently? It drove me insane, so I checked her iMessages on her laptop. After calling him 4 times, she sent him a message saying, "I'm not giving up until you actually answer and communicate with me in a respectful and civilized manner." I couldn't believe my eyes. I confronted her, and she denied it until I showed her the evidence. She admitted trying to reach her ex, but her story was convoluted. I'm uncertain about how to process this. It all happened when she started distancing herself from me. Her perspective is that it's not strange or negative for her to have kept it from me. It doesn't hold much significance to her. Any contact with an ex is a red flag for me, and it's unacceptable. Is she being unfaithful? Our closeness has been lacking for the past 6 months, which is exactly when these calls took place. Who is her AP after all? I now have concrete evidence that our issues aren't due to the reasons she's been telling everyone. The thing is, she doesn't know that I know. None of her family or friends are aware either. They all think we're just going through a temporary rough patch. She comes from a Catholic family with 3 sisters, attends church every Sunday, and we live in a small town with a population of 17,000. We recently built a house that's still unfinished. I discovered that she's planning to have me leave so that she can have time alone. Within 2 years, her AP will move to our small town to live with her in our house, along with our 2 young boys. She's hoping people will understand, claiming she needs a father figure for her kids. Interestingly, the AP is actually her first boyfriend, and they were together for 7 years before she married me. We've been together for 9 years. Although he lives abroad, he frequently visits our country. I won't let myself be manipulated that way. I've hired a lawyer and will be meeting with them soon. I have recordings that could potentially damage her reputation. My cheating wife didn't see my next move coming. I talked to my lawyer and got some eye-opening advice. Going all out and trying to ruin her life during the divorce wouldn't be the wisest move. We have kids, and I'll be co-parenting with her for the next 16 years, so I need to be mindful of that. Plus, I respect her family and don't want to involve them in the divorce proceedings as witnesses. Additionally, I don't have a chance of winning custody since the kids need to be with their mother in the small town an hour away from me in the capital city. I wouldn't even be allowed to sell our house because the kids need a decent place to live, and we don't have another option. The place they're staying at now is owned by her dad, so it's just a temporary arrangement. It sucks, but that's the reality in the Czech Republic, Europe. After our conversation, the lawyer sent her the divorce papers, set to be delivered right after Easter in the Czech Republic. Yesterday I had a day off, so I took care of my 1-year-old son while she worked in the capital city, about an hour away. Meanwhile, my brother helped me pack up my belongings from the apartment and load them into his car. To add to the chaos, the postman delivered the divorce papers, or an invitation to mediation so we could divide everything amicably. According to the papers, she's in a relationship with this guy, mentioning his first and last name, and that's apparently the reason for the divorce. But at least the evidence I have will be useful for child support and such. It'll be leverage in my favor. When she walked into the house, I confronted her, told her I knew everything, and insisted she contact my lawyer. Then I handed her the divorce papers and left to visit her parents. Naturally, she asked how I knew and denied everything. Her parents were shocked, but they believed me. I recorded the entire conversation, following my lawyer's advice. I asked if they thought I was a good husband and father, and they approved, so she can't use them as witnesses against me in court. They understood the gravity of what she had done and how it devastated our lives. I thanked them for their understanding and headed to the capital city. Meanwhile, I reached out to a friend who helped spread the news to her circle of friends. Guess what? 2 hours later, my brother-in-law called, saying she confessed to cheating with the AP, but conveniently forgot to mention any closeness with him. Classic. He filled me in on how everyone's on my side and how she destroyed our once perfect family. He then suggested everything could be saved because he cheated on his wife too, and now they're living happily. Hilarious, right? Like that's going to make me feel better. Then, to add to the circus, her father called, blaming her and saying the AP will never set foot in his house again. He cut off financial support for my soon-to-be ex-wife, tried calling the AP, but the guy didn't pick up. And in a grand finale of absurdity, he thinks it can all be saved. But hold on, there's more. Her sister sends me a text saying she's fully on my side, yet she believes the situation can be salvaged. It's good they're supporting me, but are they all delusional? It's ridiculous, as if this mess could be magically fixed. It's infuriating. I really don't think our relationship can be saved, and I'm quite certain about it. I worry others might think I lack concrete evidence for leaving her. They aren't aware of the specifics of the evidence I have. All they know is that it's some sort of tape. I've got recordings of her saying things like, "Make sure you can last longer than 3 seconds. When I come to visit you in Brussels, I'm curious if your dad's Johnson is as big as yours. I'll ask that woman how long your brother's Johnson is and let her know how big yours is. Oh, I love you so much. Well, I'm finally going to leave my husband. About time. Record yourself and send me a video. I want to see what I'm missing. Just showing you a glimpse of what your sad life without me will look like. Giving you a generous 2 years to figure out how to move back here." Crazy idea. So guess who's calling back now?
Yep, my ex. Just like all my friends predicted after her family gave her an earful. She's been texting me, confessing she had no clue what she was doing. Life would be unbearable without me. I'm so sorry for everything I've done. I'm waiting with the kids for your grand comeback, blah, blah, blah. So my lawyer finally laid out the divorce terms I want, and now we're waiting for her lawyer's response. But in the meantime, my mother-in-law flooded my phone with texts complete with Christian links about forgiveness, convinced my wife's been possessed by some evil spirit. And if that wasn't enough drama, her sister jumped on the blame train, telling me I'm the one ruining the marriage. According to her, it's all my fault for being selfish. But wait for it. Now my wife's teary-eyed and apologetic, wishing she could turn back time. Suddenly, I'm the selfish villain destroying the marriage by divorcing her. Yep, it's all on me now. Like I'm the bad guy for wanting out. I felt guilty for a moment today, like it's all my fault. They really know how to sway me. But you know what? It's tough. But I'm not changing my mind. The divorce is happening no matter what. In the Czech Republic, kids as young as ours are expected to stay with their mother in case of a divorce. Since she lives an hour away in a small town and the kids have their kindergarten and nursery there, a 50 split isn't feasible. I'll be an every other weekend dad with some additional access whenever I want. It's sad and painful, but it is what it is. I've been thinking about this unusual idea of suggesting some terms to reconcile with her. I don't love her anymore, but I do it for the kids because I care about them a lot. It wouldn't be a marriage, more like a partnership with separate finances. She'd need to move from her hometown to the capital city where I live. Also, I'd insist on having GPS in her car even when she's older and can't drive. I'd check her phone daily, and in return, I get to go on dates with other girls for 7 months. I might even cheat during the relationship and not tell her. If she finds out, whatever. No marriage. Anyway, I don't really care. It's just an idea, nothing serious, and I probably won't go through with it. I'm just desperate to silence the family accusing me of abandoning the kids. What do you think? Crazy, right? But I don't have any other bright ideas now. Currently, I'm crashing at my parents' place, sleeping on the living room couch. The dining table has become my makeshift office entertainment center, and my clothes are scattered on chairs. I work from home for about 8 hours a day, then pitch in with chores for my elderly parents, who are 90 and 82 years old. I handle groceries and drive them to doctor appointments. Besides that, I try to hit the gym or catch a movie to distract myself from negative thoughts. I see my kids every weekend. My ex drops them off, and I drive them back. Just to clear things up, I did a paternity test, confirming the boys are mine. The divorce terms situation is messy now, and it's tough to predict how it'll play out. I'm crashing at my parents' place, and as a dad of 2 and a grown adult, I have no other place to go. So I'm asking for a decent amount of money from my wife. She's agreed to take over the mortgage for the house, but is offering only a third of the money I'm asking for. She justifies it by saying that's my contribution to building the house. It's messy. I didn't cause this situation, but I need a place to live. Getting 1/3 of what I asked for won't cut it for buying a flat. The back and forth with our lawyers continues. She wants to keep the house, but she might be forced to sell it, which is what she should have done from the beginning. It'll be tough for her to manage the mortgage payments and pay me. We'll see how it pans out for child support. She's asking for more than reasonable, and we need to agree on that. On top of that, she insists I should be the one picking up the kids from the small town and driving them back at the end of the weekend. It's a lot of fuel and time on my part. In my opinion, it should be the other way around. She should be dropping them off, and I should drive them back. So you can see that she's the one responsible for all of this, but at the same time, she's ready to argue about the divorce terms. It's frustrating. My wife tried to convince me that she's remorseful and regrets what she's done. She told me she ended things with her affair partner, saw an exorcist, confessed to the affair details, and left it to God's hands. I laughed and told her I don't care about her priest. She should confess to me. I gave her a chance to come clean and asked her how many times she had been close with him. She denied it. Then I brought up the party she had with her work friends back in November and asked her why she rented an Airbnb for the night instead of staying at one of her friends' places. She went numb and couldn't find any words except for asking me why I keep torturing myself with it. I explained that if she truly felt remorseful, she wouldn't keep lying. 2 months after I left her, it was clear she wasn't being honest. I explained to her that for me, closeness over video chat is just as significant, and I'm aware that she had it with him. She couldn't even keep track of how many times she had done it with the AP. Then I confronted her, asking her how she envisions us getting back together. I pointed out how she would start a conversation with me and then lie in the very next moment. I asked her if she was aware that I would be checking her phone every day and what she thought about that. She snapped back, "That's not trust. That's just treating me like garbage, right?" At that moment, our son interrupted, and the conversation was wrapping up. I added, "Don't forget, it's not just me you cheated on, but also our 2 beloved boys." It devastated her, and she started yelling that I'd better not say anything like that again in front of our kids. It's funny. Her sister spilled the beans on how my wife acts sad and cries every day because of this situation. She's two-faced, acting all sad with the family but lying to me. She even said she could be with the affair partner and her family wouldn't care. As if I should be grateful she ended it with him and now she's in control. Seriously, divorce? After some lawyer discussions, we've agreed, and the divorce will be done soon. She gets the unfinished house, and the mortgage is all on her now. I want to clarify it's for the kids, not revenge for her cheating. Plus, I don't want to live in her small hometown, an hour away from the capital where I am now. However, I'm getting back what I invested in the house, and the amount is actually pretty good. Child support isn't bad, and we've agreed she drops the kids off in the capital every other weekend. I just have to drive them back. But honestly, seeing my kids only on weekends hurts so much. I can barely handle it. I can't bear the thought of my 1- and 3-year-old boys growing up without a father because of their mother. I wish I could have them with me, but Czech law doesn't allow it. I might have to start driving there midweek or find another way to make it work. As for her, she keeps saying she still loves me and wishes she could undo the past. She claims she suffers every day because of what she's done. She's softened to the point where she doesn't mind if I check her phone. It wouldn't make her feel bad anymore. She apologized to my parents and seemed genuinely sorry. She's willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Now here's a shocker. Her affair partner got dumped, according to mutual friends. Can you believe it? He has a family in Brussels and didn't want to risk getting caught in this mess. It was all just a game for him, playing my wife. I'm moving on, not letting her toxic behavior drag me down. The divorce is happening and there's no going back. Good riddance to the cheater. I've got better things to focus on and a brighter future ahead. Life goes on, and I'm not wasting more time looking back at the mess she created. How can you tell if your wife is cheating on you? Did her mood suddenly change, or did she start going out in the evenings? Did she express a desire to have fun with her friends, or show any other unusual behavior worth noting? As for me, let's just say I had a strong intuition. When I got home from work, she was on the phone. The moment I walked in, she hastily said, "I have to go, he's home, bye," and immediately hung up, looking at me innocently. That triggered a terrible suspicion in me. I considered asking her about the call, but she could make up anything, right? Like chatting with a salesman about buying 2 massagers for the price of 1 for a cellulite treatment. Such thoughts didn't just pop into my head. There must have been a lingering doubt about my wife. I didn't like it, and I didn't want it to bother me every day. I'm not good with change. I prefer to stay out of something that's already working fine to avoid making it worse. Let me introduce myself and tell you about my family. I'm Ron, and Cindy and I have been married for 24 years. We have 4 children, 2 adults and 2 teenagers. We're not wealthy, but we make enough to live comfortably. Thankfully, we have no debts. Cindy and I own a cozy house with a paid-off mortgage. Our cars aren't new, but we don't have monthly payments. We might have a few small credit card debts, but that's about it. Overall, we are a typical American family, trying to live within our means. On weekdays, we work, eat, and take care of our home. The younger kids go to school, and on weekends, we occasionally go out together. Cindy and I try to keep up with our kids' interests, whether it's sports, art classes, scouting, or any other activity. Sometimes we even have family dinners around a common table, a rarity in these times. Our bed life is probably like most middle-aged couples. We make love once every 2 weeks or so. I might wish it were more frequent, but, it takes 2 to tango. Lately, Cindy hasn't been enthusiastic about that kind of closeness. That was a pun. Because of my supernatural intuition, I fear I have to be vigilant for any strange signs from her. It's like I don't trust her without any apparent reason. I'm hoping this nagging feeling in my stomach is just normal indigestion and not a sign of what I suspect. My main problem is that I'm not a detective or an expert. I'm just an average middle-aged man unfamiliar with hidden cameras, phone tapping, computer hacking, and other spy techniques you might have heard about. Moreover, I'm not wealthy enough to hire a private investigator to follow my wife, especially when I don't know where to look or what to look for. Cindy manages our finances, so I have no idea about her payments. If I start going through paperwork, she'll notice and want to know why I'm buried in bills. What am I supposed to tell her? Honey, I've got a suspicious feeling in my stomach. Are you growing horns for me? Yeah, and she'll probably say, honey, I bet you'd rather go for a break than deal with that. A bit of family background. Our marriage appears quite ordinary, as it should be at our stage in life. I met Cindy in our early 20s, we dated for about a year, and then we got married every 2 years. She had a baby when we reached 4 children. Honestly, I got tired of babies popping out like moles in a slot machine, so I had a vasectomy after her last birth. One night, everyone in our house, 2 teenagers, my wife and I, had dinner together. The kids talked about their school day, and Cindy shared details about her part-time job at the library. After our 2 youngest started college, Cindy got bored being home alone, so she got a part-time job at the local library. Her schedule was irregular, making me wonder if the library was a place I should check out. But how was I supposed to do that? Taking a day off work to watch who goes in and out of the library isn't practical. Forget the library. I had a better idea. I could catch her at her women's card club tonight and start my private investigation after she left. To do that, I'd have to discreetly follow her in my trusty old pickup truck. I can't afford a rental car like husbands in stories about cheating wives. Anyway, Cindy left for the card club, and a few minutes later, I quietly slipped out. I knew where she was going since she told me and left a phone number. Unfortunately, I lost her car, so I drove to Marge's house where the poker tournament was supposed to happen. Arriving there, I saw Cindy's car among others in front of Marge's house. I waited, scanned the street, and got out of my pickup, parked a couple of houses away. I crept to a window and peeked inside, seeing 4 women at each of the 2 card tables, chatting, smoking, and occasionally bursting into laughter. Just cards, money, and 8 women having a good time. No debauchery. I was ready to intervene and put an end to what I assumed was wild behavior. But my investigation hit a snag, and as I backed up to my truck, I stepped in dog poop. Great, I muttered, waddling sideways like a drunken crab with greased shoes toward the truck. Darn dogs and their owners who let them roam freely after feeding them, leaving the rest of us to deal with unexpected landmines. I had to spend about 10 minutes cleaning dog poop off my shoes before I could hop back into my truck. The stench lingered, so I rolled down all the windows, sped up, and made sure not to obstruct the inspector or risk a ticket for the foul-smelling environmental trail behind me. Despite the disastrous first attempt, I didn't give up. My gut feeling, like a reliable compass, insisted that betrayal was looming. Once home, shedding my soiled clothes, I headed to the laundry basket to inspect my wife's undergarments. Luckily, she hadn't done laundry this week. I checked her closet for revealing dresses and inappropriate clothes, then went through every drawer in her dresser. Nothing suspicious, absolutely nothing. In the office file cabinet, I found a binder of invoices. Flipping through the bills until they blurred in front of my eyes like lotto balls, I found nothing unusual. Except for the hole in the bagel. Honestly, Cindy was a pro at hiding evidence of infidelity. She was impressive. Next, I accessed her computer, using the password she had told me long ago, which was also printed out and hanging next to the computer. I scrolled through all of Cindy's emails, realizing it was a bit silly since we shared the same account. If there was anything fishy, I would have noticed it long ago. Not surprisingly, I couldn't find a thing. Another dead end. I've been searching for 3 hours and I've got nothing against Cindy. When I read cheating stories online, there's always some evidence. Secret phone records, motel bills, unexplained spending, and more. They hire super sneaky private investigators, install clever phone tapping devices, and catch cheating spouses red-handed. Yet where is all this stuff in my case? If I can't find a thing, my Cindy must be a master at covering her tracks and playing a double game. As I gave up and started cleaning my mess, Cindy walked in through the front door. Kneeling by the laundry basket, I held her dirty underwear. We both froze. her eyes widening like cat saucers. Cindy suggested it was time for a talk, accusing me of following her to Marge's. She described seeing my face behind the open window jamb and hearing grunting in the darkness, questioning if I had stepped in some dog poop. She even mentioned the location where Marge's dog did its dirty deeds. In response, I dismissed the idea of Marge having a dog, likening it to King Kong. I sat there with a silly smile, dirty clothes in hand, feeling trapped. My face and neck grew hot, my throat went dry, and I lost the gift of English speech. I recapped recent events, expressing disbelief at finding Cindy sniffing me dirty laundry and questioning if she didn't trust me. I mumbled about whether she truly believed I was cheating on her, stammering in my defense. Cindy suggested we talk and led me to the living room. Tossing the laundry in the hamper, I got up and followed her, landing on the couch. Cindy sat down next to me, folding her hands in her lap and looking at me intently. Shrewdly, she asked if I was reading erotic stories again on my lunch break at work, to which I nodded embarrassingly. She inquired if the stories were about cheating wives, and I admitted they were. Cindy pressed further, asking if I thought of her when reading those stories. I mumbled in response, averting my gaze, admitting that I did think of her. I justified my actions by explaining that I followed her to Marge's because, upon returning home from work, I found her on the phone, hastily saying, "I gotta go," and hanging up. I went on the offensive, challenging her to explain her behavior. Cindy looked at me with raised eyebrows and a broad smile, shaking her head. She expressed uncertainty about whether to be mad at me or just hug me. Grinning, she mentioned not knowing who she should direct her feelings toward. In response, I frowned and stared back, asking about the person she was talking to when I walked in, urging her not to lie to me. She casually shrugged, disclosing that she was talking to my mother. Apparently, my mother called her almost every day, and Cindy seemed amused by my big investigation triggered by a call from my mom. She remarked on how she felt stupid for forgetting about my mom, highlighting that my mom was yet another phone-happy individual. Cindy tilted her head, smiled slyly at my guilty conscience, and then moved closer, placing her hands on top of mine and squeezing them lightly. Cindy inquired if I had ever found her behavior suspicious or distrustful, to which I admitted that it was just a gut feeling. She continued to smile and affectionately called me a miracle, expressing love despite my quirks. She wrapped her hands around my cheeks, declaring me her favorite man and reassuring me of her love. She acknowledged the need to improve our closeness and suggested addressing it immediately. With those words, she took my hand and led me into the bedroom, locked the door, dimmed the lights, and began undressing me. She asked if I felt better now with sly demons bouncing in her eyes. In response, I expressed my love and admiration, but questioned the warning signals from my gut. Cindy responded with laughter, holding her stomach and wiping away tears. She retrieved a blister of pills from the medicine cabinet and tossed it on the bed, seemingly finding humor in the situation. As I popped the wheels and froze, my wife suggested that I take 2 pills for indigestion. She listened to the rumbling response of my stomach and gave me a stern look, urging me to stop sniffing her dirty underwear. She found it disgusting and agreed with Cindy, acknowledging that when Cindy is right, she's right.